Hello beautiful people. Welcome to No Harry. In today's episode, we explore, what if Gringotts' DNA scan at age 8 revealed Harry was Lord of 9 founder houses and Merlin's heir. Hit like, subscribe, and join our community of story lovers. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The Boy Who Walked in. The Dursleys didn't notice when Harry left. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that Harry had planned it, had folded the thought carefully over 3 weeks, the way he folded his 2 large shirts to keep them from dragging on the ground, tucking the edges in until the whole thing held its shape. He'd waited for a Saturday when Uncle Vernon had his golf friends over and Aunt Petunia was hosting her book club in the sitting room, which meant the kitchen was off limits and Dudley was occupied with a new video game that he'd threatened to break Harry's fingers over if Harry touched it. The house was full of people paying attention to everything except him. He took the emergency £20 note from behind the loose brick in the garden wall. He'd found it 6 months ago and had simply never told anyone, and he walked to the bus stop on Magnolia Road with his hands in his pockets and his heart knocking against his ribs like it was trying to get out. The dream had started 3 weeks ago. It was always the same, a corridor made of dark stone, lit by torches that burned green, and at the end of it a door with no handle and no lock, just a surface covered in symbols he somehow understood without knowing how. In the dream he always pressed his palm flat against the door and felt it breathe, actually breathe, warm and rhythmic under his hand, and then he woke up with the taste of something ancient on his tongue and the absolute, bone-certain knowledge that he needed to go to London. He didn't know why London. He didn't know why Gringotts specifically. The name had surfaced in his mind the morning after the first dream like a bubble rising through still water, Gringotts, and when he'd found a discarded copy of the Evening Standard at the bus stop and paged through it idly, there had been a small advertisement on the back page, Gringotts Wizarding Bank, Diagon Alley, London. All vaults guaranteed. Established 1474. He'd stared at it for a long time, long enough that he missed the bus and had to wait 20 minutes for the next one. Wizarding Bank. Harry Potter was 8 years old. He had never done anything magical on purpose. But strange things happened around him, teacher's hair turning blue, a sweater shrinking on Dudley's head, Harry ending up on the school roof once when Dudley's gang was chasing him, and he had learned very young to pretend he didn't notice. The Dursleys' reaction to noticing had made that lesson extremely thorough. But sitting on that bus stop bench with the newspaper in his lap, reading the words Gringotts Wizarding Bank over and over, Harry had thought, someone knows something about me. And they're not telling me. That thought had been growing teeth ever since. The bus ride to London took 40 minutes and cost him most of the £20. Harry sat in the upper deck and watched the city accumulate around him, the houses thickening into rows, the rows thickening into neighborhoods, the neighborhood stacking up into the grey heft of London proper, and tried to figure out what he was going to say when he arrived at a bank that was, ostensibly, for wizards, walked up to the counter, and opened his mouth. Hello. I had a dream. I think something important is happening and nobody's told me about it. Also I'm not sure I'm a wizard but strange things happen around me and one time I accidentally set a boa constrictor free at the zoo and it winked at me on the way out. He decided he'd figure it out when he got there. Finding Diagon Alley took longer than he expected and shorter than it should have. He'd gotten off at the Charing Cross stop on instinct, walked 3 blocks, turned down a side street that smelled faintly of wood smoke despite it being July, and found himself standing in front of a pub called the Leaky Cauldron. He stared at it. The people walking past him on the pavement seemed not to see it at all, their eyes slid right past the grimy facade as though it were a patch of particularly dull brick. Harry could see it fine. He squared his shoulders and pushed the door open. Inside, a toothless barman was polishing glasses with a rag that was somehow making them dirtier. Several people in robes sat at tables. Nobody paid Harry any attention except for one old woman who looked at him, then looked again, and grabbed the arm of the man next to her with an expression like she'd seen something impossible. Harry gave her a small wave. She made a noise like a startled teakettle. He found the back courtyard through a door behind the bar. He stood in front of the brick wall for a moment, looking at it, and then he reached out and tapped the 3rd brick from the left, 2 up from the bottom, because it seemed like the right one, and because the dream memory that wasn't quite a memory in him had recognized it before his conscious mind caught up. The wall opened. Diagon Alley unfolded in front of him like a secret someone had been keeping for centuries, bright and chaotic and smelling of magical things he had no names for yet. He walked through it with his hands in his pockets and his face carefully composed, because he had learned very young that showing wonder gave people leverage over you, but privately his entire chest was lit up like a lantern. Gringotts sat at the end of the alley like it had been placed there to remind everyone what permanent looked like: white stone, towering columns, goblins in uniform standing at the doors with the particular expression of security personnel who were not, under any circumstances, impressed. Harry walked up the steps, read the poem carved above the door, "Seek not where thou dost not belong, for those who seek find more than they sought," and thought that sounded like a reasonable warning and also like exactly what he was here to do. The goblin at the door looked down at him. Harry looked up at the goblin. "I'd like to go inside, please," Harry said. The goblin's expression did not change. "Gringotts is a bank. State your business." "I'd like a heritage scan." He'd known the words before he'd known he knew them. "I think I might have a vault here. I'd like to find out." The goblin studied him for a long moment. Something shifted in those amber eyes, not warmth, exactly, but attention, which from a goblin was probably more valuable. Then it stepped aside. "Second counter on the left," it said. "Ask for Griphook." The interior of Gringotts was everything the exterior promised and more. The hall was vast, vaulted, lit by chandeliers that burned with cold blue-white flame. Dozens of goblins worked at an enormous polished counter that ran the length of the room, scratching figures into ledgers, weighing coins on scales that clinked softly in the general hum of business. The whole place smelled like old metal and older stone, and underneath that, something Harry couldn't identify, something that pressed against the inside of his skull the way a memory presses from the wrong side. He found the second counter on the left. The goblin there was young, at least, he looked young by goblin standards, which meant he had slightly fewer wrinkles than the others, and his nameplate read Griphook. "Heritage scan," Harry said. "Please." Griphook looked at him. Looked at him in the way the woman at the leaky cauldron had, like Harry's face was a word in a language he was still translating. "Heritage scans are performed in private offices," Griphook said. "The standard fee is 5 galleons, which will be deducted from any vault we locate." A pause. "If no vault is found, the fee is waived." "Name?" "Harry Potter." The quill Griphook had been holding clattered to the counter. It was, Harry would later reflect, the first time he'd seen a goblin drop anything. Griphook picked up the quill with deliberate care, set it down deliberately, and said, in a voice that had gone very level, "One moment." Then he walked, briskly, though he was trying not to look like he was moving briskly, to a door behind the counter, knocked twice, and went inside. Harry waited. He leaned his elbows on the counter because he was 8 and it was tall. A witch behind him in the queue made an impatient noise. Harry didn't turn around. The door opened again. Griphook had returned, but he was not alone. The goblin behind him was old, genuinely, impressively old, with the kind of face that looked like it had been present for several historical events and had not been particularly surprised by any of them. He wore finer clothes than the other goblins, deep burgundy robes with gold at the cuffs, and a badge on his chest that Harry couldn't read at this distance. The old goblin looked at Harry with eyes that were dark and very still, like the surface of water over something very deep. Then he did something extraordinary. He inclined his head, not a bow, not exactly, but a gesture of deliberate acknowledgement. "I am Ragnarok," he said. "Director of Gringotts, London branch." His voice was like gravel settling. "Come with me, Mr. Potter." The private office was 3 floors down, reached by a staircase that wound into the rock in a way that made Harry suspect they were going below street level. The room itself was comfortable in the way that important rooms often are: dark wood, good chairs, a desk that looked like it had survived multiple wars, bookshelves crammed with ledgers that hummed faintly to themselves. Ragnarok sat behind the desk. Harry sat across from him. Griphook stood by the door, perfectly still, holding a small silver dish and a black-handled knife. "Do you know what a heritage scan is, Mr. Potter?" Ragnarok asked. "Not exactly," Harry said honestly. "I know I need one." Something flickered across Ragnarok's face. "How did you know to come here?" "I dreamed about it." "What kind of dream?" Harry described it: the corridor, the green torches, the door with the symbols, his palm flat against its surface. As he spoke, Ragnarok's expression became progressively more still, the way things go still when they are carefully not reacting. When Harry finished, the old goblin was quiet for a moment. "The heritage scan," Ragnarok said, "requires 3 drops of blood on the registration dish. It will search our records for any magical bloodlines, inheritances, or lordships connected to your lineage. It takes approximately 10 minutes. He paused. "Most heritage scans are unremarkable. They confirm 1 or 2 bloodlines, perhaps a dormant vault. I tell you this not to lower your expectations, but so that if the results are unusual, you understand the process was performed correctly." "You're saying you want me to know I can trust the results," Harry said. Ragnarok looked at him for a moment. "Yes. That is exactly what I am saying." "All right." Harry held out his hand. Griphook stepped forward. The knife was small and very sharp, and the 3 drops it drew fell into the silver dish without any drama. Griphook murmured something in gobbledygook and the drops began to move, not spreading, but writing, drawing themselves across the dish's surface in lines that curled and connected and built on each other with increasing urgency. Harry watched, his hand wrapped in a small white cloth, and felt the thing pressing at the inside of his skull begin to press harder. The silver dish was glowing now. Not metaphorically, actually glowing, silver-white light spilling up from it and casting strange shadows on Ragnarok's face. The director of Gringotts was very still. Then the dish spoke. It didn't speak in words. It spoke in a sound like a chord struck on an instrument that had no name, and as the chord resonated in Harry's chest he felt each note individually, something vast and old and proud, something that tasted like lightning and old books, something that sang like stone beneath deep water, and on, note over note, building into a harmony so complex that Harry's mind couldn't hold it all at once and stop trying. He simply let it move through him. It felt, distantly, like coming home to a place he'd never been. When it stopped, the office was absolutely silent. Griphook was staring at the dish. His hands, Harry noticed, were not quite steady. Ragnarok was looking at Harry. His expression was not readable. Goblin faces weren't built for the kind of expression he seemed to be trying to have, but his eyes, those dark, still eyes, held something that Harry had learned, from living with people who didn't love him, to recognize, genuine surprise, which in a very old creature is rarer than almost anything. "Mr. Potter," Ragnarok said, after a silence long enough to have furniture in it, "I am going to read you the results of your heritage scan. I will read them slowly, and I will pause if you need clarification. I ask that you let me finish before you respond." He looked down at the parchment that Griphook had already drawn from the dish. It had appeared there while the chord was still sounding, written in ink that shimmered faintly. "Do you agree to those terms?" Harry, who was still vibrating faintly with the chord's residue, said, "Yes." Ragnarok read. "The Potter bloodline, ancient and proud. The Peveril line, older still, 3 brothers, death, and the things they'd bargained for. The Gryffindor line, which made Harry's breath catch, because even at 8 he knew that name. The Hufflepuff line, which made no sense until Ragnarok paused and explained that Helga Hufflepuff had left a secondary bloodline in the world, a line separate from the one everyone thought they knew about, quieter, older, running underground for centuries until it surfaced here. The Ravenclaw line." Harry's hands were flat on his knees now, pressing down. "The Slytherin line, which made him go completely still." Ragnarok said it simply, without inflection. "The Slytherin line is confirmed. There is no conflict. Magic does not distinguish between the houses. Magic is older than their disagreements. Harry nodded slowly. Then the founders Harry didn't know, Beaumont of Beauxbatons, the original founder before the school's line was re-established, and the lines of two others whose schools existed in the older histories that most wizards never read. 9 in total. 9 founder houses, all channeling through a single 8-year-old boy sitting in a chair in a Gringotts sub-basement with a wrapped hand and an expression of careful calm. And then Ragnarok said, the Merlin line. Harry was quiet. Merlin, Ragnarok continued, established several bloodlines. The most well-known, the one that every historian traces, ended in the 15th century. That line, however, was a deliberate misdirection. He set the parchment down. He looked at Harry. Merlin's true bloodline was hidden. He did not trust the wizarding world to steward it responsibly, which, given subsequent events, appears to have been sound judgment. The bloodline was sealed under a heritage lock, which could only be revealed to the individual when they were of sufficient magical resonance to bear the knowledge. A pause. You are the first individual in recorded history to break a heritage lock through a standard scan. Because I'm actually descended from him, Harry said. Because your magical resonance is sufficient to dissolve the lock. Which implies, yes, that the descent is genuine. Ragnarok folded his hands on the desk. The heritage scan is complete, Mr. Potter. You are the confirmed heir of 9 founder houses and the only living descendant of Merlin's true bloodline. Under ancient wizarding law, this grants you the title of Lord of the Sacred Nine, the seat of Merlin on the Wizengamot, which has been empty for 5 centuries, as the position requires bloodline verification, and access to 10 vaults in this institution, 3 of which are currently sealed against anything other than Lord-level magic. He stopped. Do you have questions? Harry said, yes. Why didn't anyone tell my parents? Ragnarok's expression shifted. Just slightly. The heritage lock prevented the bloodline from appearing in any scan until the resonance threshold was met. Your parents would not have known. But someone knew about the lock. Merlin placed it. The knowledge of its existence was held only by the Gringotts charter goblins, sealed in our records under the highest classification. Ragnarok's voice was careful now. We are bound by client confidentiality, Mr. Potter. We could not have revealed it without the client's presence. I'm the client now. You are. Harry sat with that for a moment. Then he said, quietly, not angrily, because he'd had 8 years of practice at not showing the size of how he felt about things, how long has Dumbledore known about the other inheritances? The Potter Vault, the Peveril Vault. He's my magical guardian, isn't he? He would have been notified. The silence that followed was different from the earlier one. This one had weight. Albus Dumbledore was appointed as your secondary guardian in the event of your parents' deaths, Ragnarok said. He was notified of the Potter and Peveril vaults at the time of your parents' deaths. He was also notified that a heritage scan had been recommended. A pause that meant something. He declined on your behalf. He declined, Harry repeated. Yes. He decided, Harry said, and his voice was very even, that I didn't need to know who I was. Ragnarok said nothing. But he was watching Harry with the same careful attention he'd had since the cord, and Harry understood, suddenly, that the director of Gringotts was deciding something. The kind of decision that didn't happen at meetings or get written in ledgers, but got made in moments like this, in quiet offices underground, between 2 people who had both just understood something about the world that changed the shape of it. Mr. Potter, Ragnarok said, as director of this institution, I am authorized to provide certain services beyond standard banking. These include legal representation, educational consultation, and access to the historical archives attached to each of your vaults. He picked up the parchment again, not to read it, just to hold it. I am also authorized to make appointments at my discretion to people who have business with this bank. His eyes met Harry's. The goblins have a long memory. We remember what the wizarding world forgets, or chooses to forget. And we remember that the law, the old law, the law written when magic was still honest, is quite clear on what it owes a sovereign heir. What does it owe one? Everything, Ragnarok said simply. Everything owed and never paid. 3 years, perhaps 4, to prepare. And then the world will need to make room for you, Mr. Potter, whether it wishes to or not. Harry looked at this ancient creature who had been running a bank for longer than most wizarding families had existed, and felt something click into place inside him the way a lock opens when you finally find the right key. Not because Ragnarok was offering him power, he hadn't yet understood what the power meant, but because Ragnarok was the first adult who had ever looked at him and told him the truth. All of it. Without dressing it up or softening it or deciding he couldn't handle it. I'd like to see the vaults, Harry said. And I'd like to learn about the old law. I expected nothing less. Ragnarok rose from his chair. Follow me. They went deeper. The vaults of the Lord of the Sacred Nine were not in the main cart system. They were below it, below the chambers where the dragons were kept, in a level that Griphook told Harry quietly had not been accessed in living goblin memory, and goblins, Griphook said, lived a very long time. The cart that took them there moved on rails that looked ancient but felt smooth, and the walls of the tunnel were carved with symbols that Harry recognized from his dream, which made his heart do something complicated. The first vault they opened, the Merlin vault, required Harry to press his palm flat against the door, the exact gesture from the dream. When he did, the symbols lit up one by one, running through colors he didn't have names for, and then the door opened with a sound like the cord from the silver dish, and the smell that came out was, old parchment, dark earth, something electrical and alive. He stood in the doorway and looked. He'd expected gold. There was some gold, columns of it, gleaming quietly in the vault's own light, but it was almost incidental. What the vault primarily held was knowledge. Bookshelves carved from stone, floor to ceiling, packed with volumes that hummed with contained magic. A worktable with tools Harry couldn't name laid out on it with precise care, as if their owner had just stepped out. A staff leaning against the wall, plain wood, dark, with no ornamentation, which made it somehow more imposing than if it had been carved with dragons. A letter, sealed, on the table. Addressed, in handwriting that crackled with age and power, to my heir, when they are ready. Harry walked to the table. He picked up the letter. He looked at Ragnarok. Can I come back? He asked. I can't take all of this in today. This vault is yours, Ragnarok said. You may access it whenever you choose. A pause. I would suggest, however, that you not return to your current residence for long. My aunt and uncle's house. Harry turned the letter over in his hands. They don't care where I am, mostly. But they'll notice eventually. The legal situation regarding your guardianship is more complicated than Albus Dumbledore arranged it to appear, Ragnarok said. Our legal team has been aware of certain irregularities for some time. Now that you are here in person, those irregularities can be addressed. How irregular? Your parents will specify a list of preferred guardians. Sirius Black was first. Remus Lupin was second. Frank and Alice Longbottom, who are now incapacitated, were third. Ragnarok's voice was steady, matter-of-fact, but Harry felt each name land. Albus Dumbledore was not on the list. He was appointed by Emergency Ministry Order the night of November 1, 1981, citing special circumstances. The will, which was formally lodged here, was overridden. They had a will, Harry said. That was lodged here. That someone overrode. Yes. Does Sirius Black know he was supposed to be my guardian? Sirius Black, Ragnarok said, is currently in Azkaban prison, convicted of murdering 12 muggles and betraying your parents to Voldemort. Harry sat with that. Did he do it? Harry asked. The pause that followed was its own kind of answer. There are irregularities in that case as well, Ragnarok said carefully. No trial was conducted. The conviction was based on ministry summary judgment in the immediate aftermath of the war, when summary judgments were being made very quickly by very frightened people. He stopped. I cannot make legal claims I cannot yet substantiate. But I can say that Gringotts holds evidence pertaining to the circumstances of that conviction, and that Gringotts has been waiting for an individual with standing to request access to that evidence. He met Harry's eyes. You have standing now. Harry was 8 years old. He was sitting in a vault that belonged to Merlin, holding a letter that was older than his whole family's recorded history, and the world was assembling itself around him in a shape that was nothing like the one he'd been told it was. He thought about the cupboard under the stairs. He thought about Aunt Petunia's voice saying freak. He thought about all the years he'd spent making himself small and quiet and hoping that if he was good enough, helpful enough, invisible enough, maybe things would change. He thought about the dream. The green-lit corridor. The door that breathed. All right, he said. He set the letter down carefully, he'd read it later, when he could give it the attention it deserved. Show me the other vaults. Then I want to talk to your legal team. He stood up. And I'd like to start coming here regularly. I can come on Saturdays. Maybe some weekday mornings in summer. He looked at Ragnarok steadily. I want to learn. Everything that's in here. I want to understand the old law and what it actually means and what I'm actually supposed to do. He paused. I'm 8. I have time. You have 3 years until Hogwarts, Ragnarok agreed. That is sufficient time for a great deal of learning, for a student with your apparent aptitude. And the Dursleys won't bother looking for me? We will arrange a notification service, Ragnarok said. A standard protection monitoring service for vault holders. The owls will indicate only that you are conducting routine banking business. His tone was entirely professional. Gringotts takes the privacy of its clients very seriously. Harry almost smiled. I appreciate that. They walked out of the Merlin vault and into the corridor, where Griphook was waiting with a second cart and an expression that had been carefully neutralized but could not quite hide the fact that he had spent the last 40 minutes processing the most significant heritage scan in recorded goblin banking history. The torches in the corridor burned gold, not green, but they cast the same long shadows, and as Harry stepped into the cart and the rails hummed to life beneath him, he felt the dream corridor in his bones, the certainty of it, the rightness, and understood what it had been trying to tell him. Not come find your destiny. Not you are special or you are chosen or any of the words that adults like to assign to children they decided mattered. It had been simpler than that. Come find out who you are. The cart moved. The vault fell away behind them. Harry held the railing and watched the ancient stone walls blur past and began, quietly and without ceremony, to become himself. 3 hours later, Harry emerged from Gringotts into the afternoon light of Diagon Alley. He had seen all 10 vaults. He had met Ragnarok's legal team, 3 goblins with sharp eyes and sharper arguments who had spent 45 minutes explaining the structure of his inheritance in terms that made his head swim but that he had followed, mostly, because he was paying very close attention. He had signed documents, which Ragnarok had read to him in full and explained in plain language before allowing him to sign, and had been issued a small, plain card that identified him to all Gringotts staff as a Lord-level client with full access rights. He had also been given a coin purse with 50 galleons, spending money, Ragnarok had said, drawn from the Potter main vault, which was more than sufficient for the purpose, and a schedule for Saturdays, starting in 2 weeks, when Ragnarok himself would begin teaching him the foundations of the old law. The arrangement was unprecedented. Harry understood this. Ragnarok had made clear that it was being undertaken at Gringotts' institutional discretion, as a matter of, in Ragnarok's exact words, long-standing debt to magical law that the wizarding world has been too comfortable to repay. Harry stood on the steps of Gringotts and looked at Diagon Alley. The afternoon crowd moved through it, robes swishing, conversations overlapping, an owl shrieking somewhere above a shop. A little girl was pressing her nose against the window of Quality Quidditch Supplies. 2 old wizards were arguing about something outside the apothecary with the comfortable energy of people who argued about the same thing regularly and would do so until one of them died. A cat with a flat face sat on a windowsill and regarded the whole scene with aristocratic boredom. Harry put his hands in his pockets. His fingers found the coin purse, solid and real. He had 3 years. He thought about Sirius Black in Azkaban, convicted without a trial. He thought about his parents' will, overridden by an emergency ministry order on the worst night of the wizarding world in living memory. He thought about Ragnarok's voice, long-standing debt, and the careful weight of it, like a stone that had been carried a long time and was finally being set down. He was not angry. Not yet, not in the burning way. He felt something colder and more useful, the same feeling he got when he was reading one of Dudley's discarded books and found a story that was trying to make him believe something that didn't add up, and the careful, precise satisfaction of finding exactly where it had lied. He needed to go back to the Dursleys today. He needed to be ordinary Harry again for a while, quiet, invisible, unremarkable. Not because he was afraid, but because certain moves required patience, and he was old enough to understand that. You didn't walk into a game and play your whole hand at once. You learned the board first. But he knew the board now, or the beginning of it. And next Saturday, he'd learn more. He walked down the steps of Gringotts, into the bright alley, a small boy in clothes that were too large, with a coin purse that belonged to a lord and a head full of things that would, in 3 years, change the shape of the world. He bought himself a meat pie from a street vendor because he hadn't eaten since breakfast, found his way back through the leaky cauldron without trouble, and caught the bus home in the early evening with the sun doing something spectacular over London's rooftops and Merlin's letter memorized word for word. He had an excellent memory when he chose to use it, running through his head like a song. The letter had said, "I did not hide this power because I was ashamed of it. I hid it because the world was not ready to hold it with care. When you read this, you will already know whether the world is ready. I trust your judgment. I trusted it before you were born, before your parents were born, before the name Potter existed. I trusted it because it is mine, and I knew what I built it to be. Do not be gentle with those who mistook your smallness for weakness. They had every opportunity to know better. You owe them patience but not deference. Use the difference wisely." Harry had read it twice, standing in the vault, and the second time he had felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't known was wound tight, some old, constant tension that he'd been carrying so long it had started to feel like posture. He sat on the bus and ate his pie and felt, for the first time in his life, like the size he actually was. Chapter 2, The Weight of 9 Names. The summer settled into a rhythm. Monday through Friday, Harry was unremarkable. He did his chores, the garden, the dishes, the vacuuming that Aunt Petunia insisted on despite the carpet being the color of a bad decision, and stayed out of the Dursleys' way with the practiced ease of long habit. He read. He always read, pulling books from the school library before summer term ended and stacking them under his cot in the cupboard with the careful economy of someone who'd learned to keep his good things in small spaces. This summer he read differently, with purpose, working backwards from things Ragnarok's legal team had mentioned, cross-referencing history dates against names, building a skeleton of the world he'd been born into and hadn't been allowed to know. The Muggle history books were useless for the specifics but useful for pattern recognition, how power concentrated, how it was justified, how the people who held it always found excellent reasons why they specifically should keep it. That pattern, it turned out, crossed any boundary you cared to name. Saturdays, he went to Gringotts. The Dursleys' awareness of Harry's Saturday absences passed through several stages over the course of that first summer. Stage 1 was genuine non-notice, which lasted 3 weeks. Stage 2 was faint suspicion, expressed by Aunt Petunia narrowing her eyes at him on Friday evenings. Stage 3 was a direct challenge from Uncle Vernon in week 4, a red-faced demand for an explanation delivered over the breakfast table with the particular energy of a man who had been working himself up to something. Harry told them, calmly and without embellishment, that he had gotten a part-time job helping with bookkeeping at a business in London. He said the owner was an older gentleman, very respectable, who had sought out young people with a talent for numbers. He said it paid well and that he was saving the money. He mentioned, lightly, in passing, almost as an afterthought, that the owner had expressed great interest in Harry's continued education and long-term prospects. Uncle Vernon's face went through several colors. The idea of Harry doing anything that could be called a success clearly troubled him. But the idea of Harry being out of the house every Saturday, not eating their food and not needing to be managed, evidently troubled him less. The math resolved itself in the way it always did with Vernon Dursley, in favor of what was least inconvenient. "Home by 6, Vernon said. "Of course," Harry said. He was never home by 6, and after the second week, Vernon stopped checking. Ragnarok taught him the old law from a chair behind a desk, in a room 3 floors underground, with a patience that Harry suspected had less to do with natural temperament and more to do with the specific way that very old things regard time, not as a resource to be managed but as a medium to move through, the way water moves through stone. Slowly. Inevitably. Without apparent urgency and with spectacular results. The old law was not the law Harry might have expected. It was not a list of rules. It was more like an ecology, a set of relationships between magical entities, blood, land, and intent that had been growing and adapting since the first wizard had looked at the world and understood it differently from their neighbor. The Wizengamot's current law was a simplification of it, the way a children's drawing of a forest is a simplification, recognizable, but missing everything that made the original what it was. The seat of Merlin, Ragnarok explained, on a Tuesday in mid-August when Harry had come in the morning and stayed through lunch, goblins, it turned out, ate lunch at a table that could only be described as aggressively practical, flat bread and strong cheese and a tea that tasted like it had been brewed specifically to keep people alert, carries legislative authority that predates the Wizengamot's founding charter by 400 years. When the Wizengamot was established, the architects included a provision acknowledging the sovereignty of the seat. This was largely ceremonial by then, as the seat had been vacant for some time. No one expected it to be filled. They wrote a provision they expected to be decorative, Harry said. Correct. The decorative provisions, Ragnarok said, with what Harry had learned to recognize as goblin humor, a very dry, almost invisible thing, are generally the ones with the most teeth. The seat of Merlin, Ragnarok taught him, gave Harry the right to introduce legislation directly to the full Wizengamot without requiring a second. The right to challenge any existing law on the grounds of conflict with pre-charter magical principle. The right to access any ministry record relevant to matters of magical sovereignty, which, under the old law's definition of sovereignty, included most things. And, perhaps most significantly, the right to call for a full magical audit of any individual serving in a public trust role, including Wizengamot members, ministry officials, and, though this had never been used, because the seat had never been filled, Hogwarts staff. Including the headmaster, Harry said, on a Wednesday in late August, not as a question. Including the headmaster, Ragnarok confirmed. He was watching Harry across the desk with that particular quality of attention Harry had come to associate with moments when the old goblin was evaluating something. I note that you have not asked what prompted Albus Dumbledore to override your parents' will. Most children would have led with that question. Harry looked up from the parchment he'd been reading. I know why he did it, he said. He wanted me controllable. He wanted me to grow up not knowing what I was, so that when he introduced me to the magical world, I'd be grateful and easy to manage. He paused. Also, I think he genuinely believes that what he does is right, which makes him more dangerous than if he was just greedy. Ragnarok was quiet for a moment. That is an astute analysis for an 8-year-old. I've had a lot of time to think about why adults make decisions about children without asking them, Harry said, and went back to the parchment. Ragnarok, who had been alive for longer than the British Ministry of Magic had existed and had seen a great many things, found that he had, unexpectedly, nothing to add. The Gryffindor vault was the one Harry spent the most time in, those first months. Not because it was the most dramatic, the Merlin vault had it beaten on sheer weight of magical atmosphere, but because it was the most personal. Godric Gryffindor had been, among other things, a man who wrote things down. The vault held journals, not polished accounts written for posterity, but actual working documents, full of scratch-outs and second thoughts and diagrams that ran up the margins because the page wasn't wide enough. Harry read them with the feeling of listening to someone think, which was different from reading what someone had concluded, and considerably more useful. Gryffindor's views on magic were not what Hogwarts taught. They were not about bravery in the chest-thumping, sword-waving sense. They were about the specific courage required to see things clearly when seeing them clearly was uncomfortable, to look at the world's contradictions and refuse to accept that they were immovable. Courage, one journal entry read, is not the absence of fear. Every fool knows this and repeats it like it's wisdom. Courage is the ability to think clearly while afraid, which is much harder than it sounds and much rarer than we pretend. Most people we call brave simply didn't understand how dangerous the situation was. The ones who knew and acted anyway, those are worth the name. The Ravenclaw vault was full of enchanted objects that tested and taught, books that quizzed you before letting you turn the page, telescopes that showed you things depending on what question you'd asked most recently, an hourglass that, when you held it, caused you to feel the passage of historical time in your bones. A disorienting but remarkable experience that left Harry with an understanding of how long a century actually was that no textbook had ever quite managed. He went back to that hourglass repeatedly. It recalibrated everything. The Slytherin vault was cold and very quiet and smelled like deep water. Harry had hesitated at its door the first time. Not from fear, but from the weight of all the stories he'd absorbed about what Slytherin meant, cunning as a synonym for cruelty, ambition as a synonym for treachery, the snake as a symbol of everything wrong. He'd stood in the doorway and thought about that for a long moment, and then he'd thought about Merlin, who had been in Slytherin House and who had been, by all accounts, the greatest magical practitioner in human history. And he'd thought about the pattern he'd noticed in his Muggle history books, how consistently the powerful labeled the qualities of people they wanted to suppress as inherently dangerous, so that those people would suppress themselves. He went in. The vault held, among other things, a Parseltongue primer, a systematic study of the language, its grammar, its deeper magical applications. Harry read it and discovered that he could already speak it, in the way you can already ride a bicycle once someone points out that you've been balancing all along. He also found Salazar Slytherin's own journals, which were nothing like the reputation. The man had been rigorous, precise, occasionally difficult, deeply suspicious of the ministry of his day, which, given what Ragnarok had taught Harry about the ministry of that era, seemed like good judgment rather than villainy. His concerns about Muggle-born wizards had not been what Harry expected either, not hatred, but fear, a specific, historically grounded fear about a wizarding world that didn't understand what it was facing, that was growing faster than it could protect itself, that needed to understand its own foundations before it opened its doors. He'd been wrong in the conclusions he drew from that fear, and he'd been wrong badly enough that the consequences echoed 1,000 years later. But the journals of a man who had been wrong were not the journals of a monster, and Harry read them carefully, noting where the reasoning had gone to pieces and why. You can learn as much from how someone failed, one of Gryffindor's margin notes said, as from how they succeeded. More, sometimes. Success mostly tells you what worked once. The letter arrived the first week of September, 9 months after Harry's first visit to Gringotts, just after his 9th birthday, which the Dursleys had not acknowledged. Harry found it on the doormat mixed in with the electric bill and a catalogue for garden furniture. It wasn't addressed to him. It was addressed to Ragnarok, from a firm of wizarding solicitors, and Ragnarok had asked them to have certain correspondence routed through the bank's correspondence address as a precaution. Harry had given his permission for Ragnarok's team to open and review his legal mail and report the relevant parts, but Ragnarok had set this one aside. "Read it yourself," the goblin said, sliding it across the desk. Harry read it. It was from the law firm of Greengrass, Bones, and Crouch, not the Crouch who had served as minister, Ragnarok noted, but his cousin, who had quietly but consistently done excellent work in the field of wizarding inheritance law and had, on 2 occasions, successfully challenged ministry summary judgments. The letter was addressed to Harry James Potter, Lord of the Sacred Nine, heir of Merlin, and it said that the firm had become aware, through their own research, of his existence and his claims, and that they wished to offer their services in 3 specific matters: the challenge of Sirius Black's conviction, the challenge of the guardianship order, and a preliminary inquiry into the circumstances of certain financial decisions made by Albus Dumbledore as secondary guardian, specifically regarding disbursements from the Potter main vault. Harry read that last part twice. There were disbursements, he said. Significant ones, Ragnar confirmed. Over the course of 7 years. I have the figures here if you wish to see them. He slid another parchment across. This is not an emergency. The money is not gone from your overall picture. Between your various inheritances, you are, to use a plain term, extraordinarily wealthy. But the principle of it is relevant. Harry looked at the numbers. They were, yes, significant. Disbursements to a private Dumbledore account, quarterly, for 7 years, drawn on the Potter main vault under a guardianship authorization that the will had never granted. He looked at them for a long moment and felt that cold, precise feeling again, not rage, but the exact sensation of finding the lie in the text, sharp and clarifying. Write back to them, Harry said. Tell them yes to all 3. The second year of Saturdays was different from the first. Ragnar still taught law, but they moved into application, mock scenarios, debates about historical cases, Ragnar arguing one side with a sharpness that left Harry scrambling and then, when Harry had found his footing, arguing the other side with equal sharpness. They were joined sometimes by 2 of the legal team goblins, Sharpclaw and Ironforge, who had between them argued 40 cases before the Wizengamot and lost precisely 3. These sessions were not polite. They were not encouraging. They were the most useful thing Harry had ever experienced, and he loved them. He also began his practical magical education in the second year. Not at school, not yet, but in a series of rooms below the vaults that the Gringotts Charter described as a patron facility, which in practice meant that the bank provided a space for Lord-level clients to practice and develop their magical abilities, for the sensible institutional reason that a Lord-level client with poor magical control was a risk to the bank's infrastructure. The rooms were large, stone-walled, and absolutely unimpressed by whatever you threw at them. Harry could already do things he shouldn't have been able to do. The heritage scan had suggested why, 9 founder bloodlines and Merlin's own line, all channeling through a single individual, created a density of magical inheritance that was, by any standard measurement, absurd. His magical core wasn't just large, it was varied, multiple resonances, multiple native affinities, each bloodline contributing something different and distinct. The challenge was not generating power but directing it, learning to choose which resonance to draw from, to understand what each one felt like from the inside, to resist the tendency to use all of them at once, which worked spectacularly for large effects and disastrously for fine work. Ragnar brought in a teacher for the practical sessions. She arrived the first Saturday of October in Harry's 9th year, a witch, which surprised him slightly. He'd expected another goblin, tall, with dark brown skin and silver-streaked hair and the bearing of someone who had walked into rooms expecting them to accommodate her for so long that it had simply become true. Her name was Mira Ashford, and she was, Ragnar told Harry, the most technically accomplished wandless practitioner currently alive. She had been, at various points in her career, a Hogwarts defense professor, an unspeakable, and an internationally recognized expert in magical theory. She was currently retired, and she had agreed to this arrangement, Ragnar said, because she had been owed a favor by Gringotts for 30 years and had decided this was how she wanted it repaid. The first thing she said to Harry was, "The wand is a focusing tool. A very good one. For most wizards, a necessary one. You are not most wizards. However." She held up one finger. "Wandless is not wandless if you're still internally constructing the wand. Half the witches and wizards who think they're working wandlessly are actually just doing the motions in their head. We're going to find out which one you are." She had him cast a simple lumos. He did it. She watched with an expression that gave nothing away. "Again," she said. "But this time, notice what you actually did. Don't decide ahead of time, observe." He did it again. This time he paid attention to the internal mechanics of it, the way you pay attention to a thing you've always done automatically when someone asks you to describe it. He found, with some surprise, that he was doing neither the standard wand magic construction nor wandless in any real sense. He was doing something different. Drawing on a resonance that didn't feel like any of the founder lines he'd learned to identify. Older. Quieter. More fundamental, like the difference between the surface of a river and the bedrock beneath it. That's Merlin's resonance, Mira said, watching his face. She hadn't looked at his hands. She was watching his face the whole time. You didn't know. I thought I was just doing magic, Harry said. Most people think that. She crossed her arms. The difference is that Merlin's resonance accesses magic at a layer below what wand work reaches. It's slower to learn and far less efficient for quick spell casting, but what it produces is more stable, more adaptable, and substantially more powerful at the upper end. She paused. It's also almost impossible to shield against, because most shielding is designed for the standard resonance frequency. Hitting it with Merlin layer magic is like trying to block a river with a net designed for catching fish. How do I learn to switch between them? Harry asked. She looked at him with a measuring expression that shifted, by degrees, into something warmer. Good question, she said. That's exactly the right question. She sat down. All right. From the beginning. The solicitors were as good as their letter had suggested. By December of Harry's 9th year, Sirius Black had been granted a formal hearing before a subcommittee of the Wizengamot, the first legal proceeding related to his case since his summary conviction. The grounds for the hearing were procedural, violation of the right to trial, which was so fundamental to wizarding law that even the most conservative Wizengamot members found it hard to publicly oppose. The solicitors had filed the challenge on behalf of Harry Potter, Lord of the Sacred Nine, and the title had not been contested because Gringotts had lodged the heritage documentation and Gringotts' heritage documentation was, legally and practically, unimpeachable. Harry had not attended. Ragnarok had advised against it. Not from secrecy, they were well past the point where secrecy served any purpose, but from strategy. Let the legal process move first, Ragnarok said. Let the world have time to understand what the name means before it has a face to argue with. But the hearing's outcome came back to him through the solicitors by owl, late on a Thursday evening when Harry was reading in the cupboard under the stairs, hearing granted. Full Wizengamot trial scheduled for March. Pettigrew inquiry opened. Below that, in the solicitor's precise handwriting, there appears to be a great deal of interest in your situation, Lord Potter. Several Wizengamot members have begun making inquiries. Notably, Director Amelia Bones has requested a formal introduction. Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Harry had read about her. Incorruptible, effective, deeply committed to proper process. The kind of person who made the system work when it worked and fought the system when it didn't. Right back to Director Bones, Harry wrote in reply. Tell her I'm available and look forward to meeting her. And please stop calling me Lord Potter in correspondence. Harry is fine. The solicitors wrote back, as you wish. Though we should note that, Harry, in official ministry correspondence may cause some confusion regarding the gravity of your position. Harry wrote, good. People who underestimate me because I use my first name are easier to work with. There was a longer pause than usual before the reply arrived, and when it did it contained only, understood, Harry. Dumbledore's letter came in January. It was not unexpected. Harry had been aware, from Ragnarok sources and from the solicitor's updates, that the Sirius Black hearing had sent shockwaves through certain parts of the wizarding world, and that the name Harry Potter had been circulating with increasing urgency in those parts. Dumbledore was, above everything else, a man who paid attention. He would have been paying attention to this. The letter was long and very well written, which Harry had expected. It was warm and careful, opening with expressions of deep feeling about his parents and his well-being, moving into a gentle concern about certain legal actions that had apparently been initiated in Harry's name, suggesting that a 9-year-old boy making Wizengamot-level legal challenges might have been given advice that, however well-intentioned, was perhaps not fully in his interest. It offered a meeting. It offered guidance. It reminded Harry, with the tender gravity of a man who had known his parents, that the magical world could be a complex and dangerous place for someone who was famous in it, and that there were those who might seek to use a young boy's good name for purposes that were not good. Harry read it twice. He set it down on the desk in Ragnar's office, where he'd opened it, and looked at the old goblin. "He's not wrong about the first part," Harry said. "It is a complex and dangerous place." The part where he's describing himself as complex and dangerous without realizing it is the interesting bit. "How do you wish to respond?" Harry thought. "I'll meet him," he said. "Not here, not at his convenience, not on his terms. The solicitors can arrange a neutral location with a third-party witness. Greengrass has done that before." He paused. "I want a Wizarding certified truth witness present. And I want a full record kept." He picked the letter up again and looked at the signature, that long familiar name with its titles trailing after it. "He thinks this is about someone manipulating a child. I want him to understand, in person, that it isn't." Ragnar said nothing, but there was something in his expression that Harry had learned to recognize over 18 months of Saturdays, the look of a very old creature that had been waiting a very long time for something to finally happen. "There is one more thing," Ragnar said, as Harry folded the letter. "Your Hogwarts letter will arrive next year. You are, of course, already committed to attending. Your inheritances include specific provisions regarding Hogwarts, and the Founders' Vaults have made it clear that the school itself responds to your bloodline in certain ways that will require your presence to address." He paused. "But the terms of your attendance are negotiable. More negotiable than Hogwarts has admitted in several centuries." "What terms?" Harry asked. "Your housing, your curriculum, your status within the school's governance structure." Ragnar folded his hands. "The founders established Hogwarts jointly. The school is governed by their charter, which predates both the Ministry of Magic and the current Board of Governors. As heir to all four founding houses, you do not sit as a student in Hogwarts in any conventional sense. You sit as a charter heir." He let that settle. "Albus Dumbledore is headmaster by the board's appointment. The board's authority, under the founder's charter, is subordinate to the charter heirs." He met Harry's eyes. "I mention this not to suggest a confrontation, but because you should walk through those doors knowing exactly where you stand." Harry stood up, tucking the letter into his bag. Outside, in the upper halls of Gringotts, he could hear the distant sound of the main hall, coins, quills, the hum of business. The solid, daily work of a world that had been running its affairs for centuries and had learned that the truest power was the kind that kept its accounts accurate. "I'll know," he said. "What else do I need to learn before September?" "The law is covered," Ragnar said. "The practical magic is progressing well. Mira tells me you have made extraordinary progress with the resonance differentiation. You are now operating all 9 bloodline affinities distinctly, which is something she tells me is theoretically impossible and therefore not worth discussing with anyone who has not seen it themselves." A slight pause that was the goblin equivalent of a smile. "What remains is people." "People," Harry repeated. "You will walk into Hogwarts and every student there will have heard the name Harry Potter in the context of a legend. Most of them will have strong feelings about what that legend means. A number of adults will be trying to use you. A small number of people will genuinely see you clearly." Ragnar's voice was even. "The skill required for that environment is different from legal strategy or magical technique. It requires the ability to distinguish quickly between what people are showing you and what they actually are." He looked at Harry steadily. "You have natural aptitude for this. But aptitude is not the same as experience. So I need to actually talk to people my own age," Harry said. "It would be advisable." Harry thought about the Dursleys' neighborhood, the children there who had mostly avoided him at Dudley's instruction, and the school he'd attended where being too clever was a social liability. He thought about being 9 years old and finding it genuinely easier to talk to a 500-year-old goblin than to a classmate. He thought about whether that was a problem and decided it probably was. "I'll work on it," he said. The meeting with Dumbledore happened in February, at a neutral space the solicitors arranged, a private room at a wizarding hotel in Edinburgh, with a certified witness named Madame Vosburgh who had spent 30 years verifying legal testimony and whose expression suggested she had heard everything and been surprised by none of it. Harry arrived first. He sat at the table with his hands folded and watched the door. Dumbledore walked in and Harry understood, immediately and completely, why he was so effective. It wasn't the height or the robes or the beard, though all of those were impressive in their way. It was the quality of his attention. When those blue eyes found Harry across the room, Harry felt seen in a way that was almost physical, warm and encompassing, the gaze of someone who was genuinely present in a way most people never managed. It was an extraordinary skill. Harry filed it immediately. This is a tool, and it is being used deliberately, even if he doesn't think of it that way. Harry, Dumbledore said. His voice was what Harry had expected, rich, warm, the voice of someone who read good books and thought carefully about words. He sat down. He folded his hands in an unconscious echo of Harry's own posture. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Of course, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. Really looked, the way the heritage scan had been looking, deep and measuring. Harry sat under it without shifting and looked back with the same quality, because Mira had spent 6 months teaching him, among other things, that presence was not aggression, and that the instinct to be smaller in the face of a powerful person's attention was a habit worth breaking. You are nothing like I expected, Dumbledore said, quietly. What did you expect? A pause. A child who had been influenced. Guided in directions that served someone else's interests. His tone was not accusatory. It was thoughtful, and Harry believed it was genuinely thoughtful, which was the thing about Dumbledore, the thoughts were real. I confess I find it somewhat difficult to believe that a 9-year-old boy arrived independently at the decision to challenge a decades-old conviction before the Wizengamot. I didn't arrive at it independently, Harry said. I had help from the Gringotts legal team and an excellent firm of solicitors. He paused. The decision was mine, though. I read the files. The evidence for Sirius Black's conviction is a man screaming on a street that he'd killed everyone. That's it. No one test, no independent witness, no formal statement. I was 8 when I saw that and I thought it was wrong. I'm 9 now and I still think it's wrong. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Sirius Black was a disturbed young man, he said. Grief can cause, the evidence for Pettigrew's death is also a screaming man and a finger, Harry said. There's no body. There's no wand evidence. There's no investigation. He kept his voice conversational because he wasn't performing anything, he was genuinely calm. I'm not saying Sirius is innocent. I'm saying we don't know, because no one checked. Another silence. Madame Vosburg's quill scratched softly in the corner. Harry, Dumbledore said, and now his voice had shifted, still warm but with something more serious running under it, there are things you do not know yet about the circumstances of your parents' deaths. Things that have bearing on your safety and on the safety of others. Things I have kept close because they needed to be kept close. He met Harry's eyes. I would like to explain them to you. When you are older, and when the time is right. With respect, Harry said, that's exactly what you said to yourself in 1981 about my parents' will, and about the heritage scan recommendation, and about 8 years of Gringotts vault maintenance that you declined on my behalf. He didn't raise his voice. I'm not angry about it. I understand the thinking. You decided I needed to be protected from information, and you made that decision without asking me. I'm asking you, now, not to do it again. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. The blue eyes were doing that seeing thing, looking for the manipulation, the adult hand, the behind-the-scenes explanation. Harry let him look. There was nothing to find. You remind me of your mother, Dumbledore said, finally. It sounded like it cost him something. She had the same quality of speaking plainly in rooms that expected politics. Tell me about her, Harry said, and his voice was entirely level, but it was the first time in the meeting that he'd asked for something that wasn't tactical, and Dumbledore heard the difference. They sat there for an hour and a half. Dumbledore talked about Lily and James, stories Harry had never heard, small real moments rather than the legend-shaped memories people usually offered. Harry listened with everything he had, storing each detail with the careful hunger of someone who had been starved of something for a long time. And as he listened, he watched Dumbledore's face and understood something he hadn't fully known before. This man did love him, in the way that powerful people love the pieces they care about on a board they're playing. It was real love. It was also deeply insufficient. When the meeting ended, Harry shook Dumbledore's hand. The old wizard held his hand for a moment. "You are going to change things," Dumbledore said. Not as a warning. As a statement of resigned, complicated admiration. "Yes," Harry said. "But I'm going to do it the right way." He walked out into the Edinburgh Street, where a cold February wind was moving through the city with cheerful destructiveness, and turned his face up to it for a moment. He felt the wind on his face and the weight of the 9 names sitting quiet in his blood and the specific, clean satisfaction of having said the true thing plainly to a person who had expected something else. 3 months later, Sirius Black walked out of a Wisengamot hearing a free man, exonerated by a combination of Veritaserum testimony, the discovery that Peter Pettigrew was alive and in rat form in the possession of the Weasley family, and a comprehensive deconstruction of the summary conviction process submitted by Greengrass, Bones, and Crouch that the legal community would still be citing 20 years later. Harry was not present for the hearing. He was at Gringotts, learning the specific resonance signature of the Hufflepuff line, which Mira had described as building magic, the kind that reinforced, protected, grew, and which had an application to ward work that she'd spent 3 decades trying to document and had never been able to replicate because no one else had the right bloodline. He got the news by owl. He read it twice. Sirius Black, free. Address, currently being arranged. Wishes to meet Harry Potter at the earliest possible opportunity. Harry wrote back through the solicitors, "Tell him I know who he is and I'm glad he's out. Tell him I look forward to meeting him and that I'm sorry it took this long. Tell him my name is Harry." He folded the letter and set it down and let himself feel, for exactly 1 minute, the size of that relief. Someone who had been in the dark for 8 years, in the worst place. More actions request aborted. Write the next chapter now. Chapter 3, September 1st. The Hogwarts letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late July, delivered not by a standard school owl but by something extraordinary, a bird Harry had never seen before, large and golden, with feathers that shifted color in the light and eyes the amber gold of old whiskey. It landed on the Dursleys' garden wall with the quiet authority of something that had never in its life been uncertain about where it was going, and it regarded Harry with an expression that was, somehow, expectant. The letter was heavier than it should have been. The envelope was thick cream parchment sealed with the Hogwarts crest, but there was a second seal beneath it, a double seal, a smaller one pressed into the wax beside the castle and the 4 animals, the crest of the Founder's Charter, which Harry recognized from the documents Ragnarok had shown him nearly 2 years ago. He broke both seals and unfolded 2 separate letters. The first was the standard Hogwarts welcome, term begins September 1st, enclosed find your supply list, please acquire robes in black. The second was shorter and written in a different hand, older-looking ink on parchment that felt like it had memory in its fibers. The castle recognizes your blood, it read. The doors will know you. The rooms will know you. Whatever the current governance of this institution may tell you about your place within it, the stones know what you are. Welcome home. No signature. No date. Harry turned it over. On the back, in very small letters at the bottom corner, was a symbol he recognized from the Founder's vault walls, a 9-pointed star that was also somehow a single unbroken line. He folded both letters carefully and put them in his back pocket. The golden bird watched him. "Thank you," Harry said to it. It ruffled its feathers once, with great dignity, and took off. He met Sirius Black in person for the first time 3 weeks before September, in the front room of a house in Grimmauld Place that smelled like old magic and older unhappiness, and the meeting went nothing like either of them had planned. Harry had imagined it as formal, careful, 2 people who were technically family but practically strangers, sizing each other up with polite interest. What actually happened was that he walked through the door and Sirius was already on his feet across the room, and the expression on the man's face was so completely unguarded that Harry stopped walking for a moment. Sirius Black looked at him the way people looked at things they'd been afraid they'd lost forever and then hadn't. He was thinner than he should have been, with the hollow-cheeked, wide-eyed quality of someone who had spent too long in a place that wanted to erase them. His hair was long and dark and his eyes were grey and absolutely intent on Harry. "You look like James," Sirius said. His voice was rough. "Except the eyes. Lily's eyes." "I know," Harry said. "I've seen pictures." "Right. Of course you have." Sirius stopped. He ran a hand through his hair and laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that lives right next to tears. "I've been rehearsing what I was going to say to you for 6 weeks. I had points. I had an actual structure. What happened to it? You walked in and you look exactly like them and I completely lost the thread." Sirius sat back down heavily on the sofa and looked at Harry with an expression that was now more focused, recalibrating. "Ragnar's letter said you were unusual." "His letters don't usually say things like that. Ragnar's letters are usually about 20 words and contain 3 insults dressed as compliments." Harry sat down across from him. "He said I was unusual. He said, and I'm quoting exactly, that you had demonstrated a quality of thinking that he had encountered in clients perhaps twice in his professional lifetime and that while he would ordinarily not recommend family reunification as a priority for someone of your, and again, quoting, strategic standing, in your specific case he believed it was both personally important and practically useful." Sirius paused. Coming from Ragnar, that's basically a declaration of love. Harry found, to his own surprise, that he was smiling. "He also said you were loud." "I'm a lot of things." Sirius leaned forward, elbows on his knees. The lightness had shifted back to something more serious. "Harry. I need you to know, and I know this doesn't fix anything, and I know it's 11 years too late, but I should have fought harder. When they took me and threw me in Azkaban without a trial, I had access to legal resources, to people who," he stopped again. "Restarted. I was so destroyed after losing them that I didn't fight. I just sat in that cell and thought about what I'd done wrong and what I should have done differently, and none of those thoughts included get a lawyer, which was stupid and I will regret it for the rest of my life." "You couldn't have known about me," Harry said. "That's not, you couldn't have known I'd need you," Harry said, with the plain, patient tone he'd developed over 2 years of saying difficult things to people who needed to hear them. "You didn't know what Dumbledore had done with the will. You were grieving and they locked you up before you could think straight. That's not a character failure. That's what happens to people in catastrophic situations." He paused. "You're out now." Sirius looked at him for a long moment. "You are not like any 11-year-old I've ever met." "I've had an unusual 2 years," Harry said. They talked for 4 hours. Sirius told Harry things about his parents that filled in the spaces Dumbledore's stories had left, the specific texture of James' humor, the way Lily had argued like she was personally offended by imprecision, the dynamics of the group of friends that had called themselves the Marauders. He told some of it laughing and some of it quietly and some of it with the careful voice of a person reconstructing something from pieces, the way you speak when the thing you're describing both was wonderful and is gone. Harry asked questions. He asked specific, detailed questions, because he had learned to store everything and he wanted everything there was. At some point Sirius said, "You're going to Hogwarts in 3 weeks." "Yes. Dumbledore is going to watch you very closely." "I know." Harry stretched his arms above his head and looked at the ceiling of this strange old house, old magic in the walls, old unhappiness, old dark tapestries he could see in the hallway that he'd want to examine more carefully another time. "I'm not planning to be difficult. I'm just going to be exactly what I am. He'll find that plenty difficult enough without me trying." Sirius was quiet for a moment. "You're not," he frowned, not unkindly, "working something out. Most kids in your position, most people in your position, frankly, the first thing they'd want to do is use it. Throw their weight around, make sure people understood, I know what I am," Harry said. "I don't need people to confirm it." He looked back at Sirius. And I'm going to Hogwarts to learn. The practical magic foundation Mira has given me is extraordinary and the law is covered, but there's still actual curriculum I need. Potions, transfiguration, astronomy, I don't have the formal base in half of it. I'm going to be a student. I just happen to also be other things at the same time. Sirius shook his head slowly, with something that was either disbelief or admiration and was probably both. Ragnak was right, he said. You're remarkable. Your mother would be, he stopped. Tell me, Harry said. And Sirius told him. September 1st broke grey and cool over London, the kind of morning that felt like a deliberate atmospheric statement about transitions. Harry arrived at King's Cross with one trunk, a small bag, and no adult escort, having left the Dursleys for the last time that morning with his key on the kitchen table and nothing said. The guardianship challenge had concluded the previous month, with Sirius exonerated and the will stipulations legally reinstated. Harry was now technically in Sirius's care, though in practice Harry had been managing his own affairs for 2 years and they both treated the arrangement as more of a formality with occasional Sunday dinners. He found the barrier between platforms 9 and 10 without difficulty. It felt like walking through a thought that had always been there, and stepped out onto platform 9 3/4 into the organized chaos of September 1st. The Hogwarts Express sat along the platform gleaming scarlet and enormous, filling the air with steam that caught the light and made the whole platform look like something from a painting. Trunks and owls and families and noise and the particular emotional electricity of a crowd of people who were simultaneously excited and not quite ready. Harry moved through it with his trunk and found a compartment near the middle of the train that was empty. He stowed his trunk, sat down by the window, and watched the platform. He was watching for a specific pair of people. Ragnak had, over the course of 2 years, become interested in Harry's life in a way that was practically familial, meaning he expressed it entirely through the giving of relevant information. 3 months ago he had mentioned, in passing, that the Longbottom vaults had been reviewed recently following the reinstatement of Frank and Alice Longbottom's affairs to their extended family, and that Neville Longbottom, Frank's son, would be starting Hogwarts this year. He'd mentioned it with the precise neutrality of someone who was not suggesting anything, but who knew that Harry was aware of what Neville Longbottom meant in the wider picture of things, the boy who had been the other candidate in the prophecy, raised under the crushing expectation of a grandmother who had wanted a boy who lived and got, instead, a child who preferred plants. Harry had done his reading. The second person he was looking for he'd found by accident, a mention in a ministry bulletin about Muggleborn acceptance rates, which had led him to a report by a campaign group called Muggleborn Integration Initiative, which cited a statistic that had made Harry stop mid-read. Among Muggleborn witches and wizards who showed evidence of exceptional magical ability before Hogwarts, the dropout rate within 3 years was 43%. The report had included case studies. One of them was anonymous but very specific, a girl, exceptional test results, known for an ability to analyze and reproduce complex spellwork on first exposure, who had been described by her primary school teachers as intimidatingly intelligent and by her peers as something less kind than that. The case study had described her relationship to the magical world as anxious attachment, desperately wanting to belong to it while constantly performing for its approval. That case study was almost certainly Hermione Granger, because there was exactly one Hermione Granger starting Hogwarts this year, and Harry had done enough reading to know it. He spotted Neville Longbottom on the platform first, a round-faced boy with the expression of someone carrying something heavy without being sure he's allowed to put it down. He was with an older woman in a severe hat who was talking at him with the kind of dedicated intensity that suggested she was trying to load information into him through sheer repetition. As Harry watched, Neville nodded along to whatever she was saying with the practiced patience of a person who had been nodding along to this particular speech for years, and then the woman kissed his forehead, straightened her hat, and walked away, and the expression that came over Neville's face when he thought no one was watching was so specifically, quietly sad that Harry felt it like a bruise. He went to the compartment door and opened it. "Neville Longbottom," he said. Neville looked up. He had the startled expression of someone not accustomed to being addressed directly. "Yeah. I'm Harry Potter. Come sit with me." There was a pause while Neville processed several things simultaneously, and then he picked up his trunk and came. Hermione Granger found them 20 minutes later, which Harry had anticipated. The compartments were filling up, and a girl who had done her reading would gravitate toward empty space and then, finding it occupied, would do the social calculus of whether to stay or go. She appeared in the doorway with her hair in a state of organized chaos and a book tucked under one arm, took in the two of them, and opened her mouth to ask if anyone was sitting in the remaining seats. "Please sit down," Harry said. "I'm Harry, this is Neville." She sat, studying both of them with the focused attention of someone who collected data instinctively. Her eyes settled on Harry in the way everyone's eyes did, but she recovered faster than most and said, "I know who you are. I've read about you." Then she looked slightly like she wished she hadn't said that quite so directly. "What did you read?" Harry asked, with genuine curiosity. "Several things." She set her book on the seat beside her. It was a copy of Hogwarts, a history, annotated in the margins with small, precise handwriting. Most of it was vague. The Wisengamot hearing for Sirius Black last year was more specific. "You filed that, didn't you?" "My legal team did," Harry said. "I made the decision." She looked at him for a moment. "You're 10, she said. 11, as of July. You filed a Wisengamot challenge at 10. 10 3/4, Harry said. The founder's line entitles me to certain legal standing. The case for the challenge was straightforward, no wand test, no body, no trial. It was a procedural argument, not a complex legal strategy. Hermione looked at him with an expression that was recalibrating rapidly. The irregularity in the conviction should have been caught before it got to Wisengamot level, she said, slowly, working it out. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement should have flagged, yes, Harry said. They should have. But they didn't. No. She sat with that for a moment. That's a systemic problem, she said. Not just one case. Yes, Harry said again. That's exactly right. Neville was looking between them like he was watching a particularly high-stakes tennis match. He had the expression of someone who had been present for many conversations in which he was not directly addressed, and was not yet sure this one was different. Harry turned to him. Your Gran was giving you instructions. Neville looked slightly startled. Yeah. She does that. Yeah. What does she want from you at Hogwarts? It was a direct question, and Neville blinked at it. Most people, Harry had noticed, didn't ask children what adults wanted from them, they asked what the children wanted, which was well-meaning but missed the point. What you wanted was often less comprehensible to you than what you were trying to do for someone else. She wants me to be. Neville stopped. Started again. She had this whole idea that I might be, that I was supposed to be important. Like you. Because of the prophecy thing. And I'm not, clearly, so now she wants me to at least be good enough that it doesn't embarrass her. He said it flatly, the flat tone of someone who had been living with a fact long enough to have stripped the pain from their telling of it. She doesn't think I'm very magical. Are you? Harry asked. Neville looked at his hands. I can make things grow, he said quietly. Plants. I just touch them and it's easy. It's the only thing that feels easy. He looked up with a kind of defensive honesty. I know that's not impressive. Harry thought about Helga Hufflepuff's vault. About the building magic, the growing magic, the resonance that reinforced and cultivated and made things more. He thought about how consistently the wizarding world valued the flashy and the violent over the quiet and the generative, and what that cost. It's not unimpressive, Harry said. It's actually really rare. The growth resonance is one of the most technically demanding there is. He saw Neville's expression and continued before it could collapse into the reflex of self-deprecation. I'm not saying that to be nice. I'm saying it because it's true, and I've spent 2 years studying magical resonance with someone who spent 30 years as an unspeakable. You should stop letting other people define the value of what you can do. The silence that followed was the specific silence of someone who had just heard something they'd needed to hear and hadn't been sure anyone would ever say. Hermione had her book open but was not reading it. She was watching Harry with an expression he'd already learned to associate with her, alert, assessing, the look of someone updating their model of a situation in real time. "What are you planning for Hogwarts?" she asked. "Learning," Harry said. "And some other things." He looked at both of them. "I'm going to tell you something and then you can decide whether you want to be involved in it or not, because it's your choice and I'm not going to ask you to do anything you're not comfortable with." He paused. "The Hogwarts Founders Charter grants me certain rights within the school that the current administration doesn't publicly acknowledge. I'm not going to hide what I am when I get there. That will cause some difficulty with some people. There are things in the school itself, in the magic of the building, that need to be addressed, and I'm the only one who can address them. It's not going to be a quiet year." He looked at Neville. "Your parents were extraordinary people who were destroyed by someone who was afraid of what they knew. I think you're underestimated for the same reason your father was, because you're quiet, and because quiet doesn't read as powerful until it does." He looked at Hermione. "And you are exactly as intelligent as you think you are. In a world that would rather you were less so. That's going to matter." Another silence. Outside the compartment window the platform had emptied and the train was beginning to move, the world outside sliding slowly and then less slowly past the glass, London giving way to countryside. Neville said, "What do you need us to do?" "Right now," Harry said, "absolutely nothing. We're going to Hogwarts. Let's see what it's like." Hogwarts appeared out of the darkness with the particular drama of something that was absolutely aware it was doing it. Harry looked at it through the boat's thin mist, the castle rising from the rock above the lake, lit from within, towers throwing their lights onto the black water, and felt what he'd felt in the Merlin vault on a larger scale, recognition. Not memory. Something older. The stones doing what the letter had promised, knowing him. The first years processed through the entrance hall with their dripping robes and enormous eyes, and Harry walked through the great stone doors and felt the building shift around him. Barely, almost imperceptibly, like a vast thing drawing breath. Hermione, walking next to him, shivered slightly. "You felt that," Harry said quietly. "What was it?" she murmured back. "The castle recognizing the bloodline," he said. "It shouldn't affect you directly. But it's strong enough to feel adjacent to." McGonagall led them in. The great hall was everything, the floating candles, the enchanted ceiling showing a clouded sky, the 4 long tables with their watching students, the teachers at the high table. Harry looked along the high table and found Dumbledore without difficulty, because Dumbledore was already looking at him. They exchanged a glance of complete mutual understanding. It was, Harry thought, almost comfortable, 2 people who had had a real conversation and had understood each other well enough to have no illusions. He nodded once. Dumbledore inclined his head. The sorting began. Harry listened to the Hat's song. It was about unity this year, more urgently than it apparently usually was, with a whole verse about the dangers of division that the older students seemed to find mildly unusual. He was not paying full attention to the song. He was watching the room. The Gryffindor table, the Slytherin table, the way certain students were already tracking him, the whispers running the hall like a current in water. He caught his name being passed around and let it go. It didn't concern him. Granger, Hermione. Hermione walked up with her chin level and her shoulders set in the way of someone performing composure. The hat dropped over her head and was quiet for less than 3 seconds. Gryffindor. The table roared. Hermione let out a breath that even from a distance Harry could see, and walked to the table with an expression of barely contained relief. Harry watched her go with quiet satisfaction. Longbottom, Neville. Neville walked up and Harry saw the slight tremor in his hands. The hat sat on Neville's head for a long time, longer than Hermione, longer than most, and Harry, watching, thought, it's trying to decide between houses, but it's also trying to decide what Neville needs. The distinction mattered. A different hat might sort for optimal fit, this one sorted for optimal growth. Gryffindor. The table welcomed Neville and he sat down and looked immediately, reflexively, for Harry, which Harry found both touching and telling. "Potter, Harry." The hall went very quiet. Harry walked to the stool and sat down. McGonagall lowered the hat over his head and the world went dark for a moment, and then the hat's voice was in his ear, old, layered, not quite like a human voice, the voice of something that had been listening to children's deepest thoughts for 1,000 years. "Well," it said, and the word carried a quality of genuine surprise. "Now that is extraordinary." "Hello," Harry thought back at it, with genuine curiosity. "What do you see?" "Everything," the hat said. "All of it." "All 9, and more than 9. The old line below all of them." A pause. "You know I can put you anywhere." "I know," Harry thought. "Where do you think I should go?" "That's the wrong question," the hat said, sounding slightly amused. "You already know where you're going. You came in knowing. The question is why?" "Because it's home," Harry thought simply. "My father's house. My mother's house. And because the people I've already decided matter to me are there." "Yes," said the hat. And because Godric Gryffindor wrote that courage is the ability to think clearly while afraid," Harry thought, "and I think that's going to be relevant." "It is going to be relevant," the hat agreed. There was something in its voice that was older than amusement. "Very well, then. You know what you are. What do you want this school to be?" Harry thought about that for a genuine moment. What it was supposed to be, he thought. Before it started being convenient instead. The hat was quiet for just a moment more, and then it said, in a voice that managed to sound both inevitable and pleased, "Gryffindor." The table erupted. Not just polite noise, actual sound, the kind that builds on itself. Harry took the hat off, handed it to McGonagall, and walked to the table. He sat across from Hermione and next to Neville and accepted the noise without apparent concern. A red-headed boy down the table leaned across and said, with enormous enthusiasm, "Wicked." "I'm Ron Weasley, blimey, I can't believe I'm sitting, Harry," Harry said. "Nice to meet you." Ron's ears went slightly pink and he sat back but kept grinning, and Harry thought, genuine, no agenda, finds things genuinely exciting rather than strategically. He filed it. People who found things genuinely exciting were valuable in ways that careful people underestimated. He looked at the high table. Dumbledore was watching with an expression of complicated feeling. A man in a purple turban, the defense professor, Harry knew, Quirinus Quirrell, was staring with an intensity that was odd, slightly too sustained. On the other end of the table, a man with shoulder-length dark hair and the expression of someone managing a migraine was watching him with black eyes that were sharp and estimating. Severus Snape. Potions master. Former Death Eater, Dumbledore's man, once James Potter's worst enemy and Lily Evans's oldest friend, until he'd let one of those things kill the other. A man carrying a lifetime of choices he couldn't take back and knew it. Their eyes met. Harry held it for a moment, not aggressively, just steadily, and then looked away first, because first was a choice too, and choosing to look away after having looked was different from never having held it in the first place. The feast appeared and the hall filled up with noise and food and 100 overlapping conversations, and Harry ate and talked and listened and thought, the way he had learned to do all simultaneously. It took practice but was worth it, and across the table Hermione was already in a discussion with a second year about something in Hogwarts, a history, and Neville was quietly, methodically, eating a meal that was probably better than whatever he'd been managed on at home, and the castle was warm around all of them, genuinely warm, the warmth of old stones that had been housing learning and growing things for 1,000 years. 3 days in, Harry found the classroom. He found it by feel, the same instinct that had taken him to the right brick in the courtyard wall, the same pull that the dream corridor had given him, now familiar enough that he could follow it without effort. It was on the 7th floor, behind a tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy attempting to teach trolls ballet, and you had to walk past it 3 times thinking about what you needed and then the door appeared. He needed a space to work that wasn't the common room or the library or the classroom schedule that Professor McGonagall had laid out with the precision of someone who genuinely loved order. He thought about that while he walked past the blank wall 3 times, and the door appeared. Inside was a room that was exactly what he'd needed and hadn't quite been able to specify, a large space with bookshelves that were mostly empty, waiting, a clear floor, good light, and the quality of magical insulation that meant whatever you did in here didn't interfere with the castle's ambient magic. He stood in the middle of it and felt the castle's attention, the same attention he'd felt at the entrance, and thought, of course. This was the room of requirement. It was in his bloodline knowledge the way Parseltongue was, a fact below facts. He brought Hermione and Neville there on the 4th evening, for no specific reason other than that it seemed like something that belonged to all of them. Hermione walked in and turned slowly on the spot, taking in the shelves, the light, the quality of the floor. "How does it work?" she asked immediately. "It gives you what you need," Harry said. "You think about what you need walking past the wall and the room configures itself. So it's responsive architecture." She was already pulling her notebook. "Do the shelves have limits? Can I ask it for specific books or just categories of?" "Try it," Harry said. She turned to the nearest shelf and thought at it. He could see her doing it, the focused crease between her brows, and after a moment a book appeared on the shelf. She snatched it up. Advanced Charms Theory, Nonverbal Applications. Her face did something that was almost reverent. "This is a 6th-year text," she said. "I know," Harry said. He was watching her with quiet satisfaction. This was what she was. Not just smart, hungry, in the good way, the way that built things rather than hoarded them. Neville had gone to the corner, where a wide shallow table had appeared, wood-topped, with what looked like a growing medium in it already, dark rich earth, and was standing in front of it with the expression of someone who had just found something they had been looking for without knowing it. "Can I?" he started. "Of course," Harry said. Neville touched the earth and something immediate happened, a faint green glow, barely visible, threading up from beneath the surface. He pulled his hand back and stared at it. "I didn't even try," he said. "You don't have to try," Harry said. "That's the point. The trying is someone else's definition of what magic is supposed to look like. This is yours." Neville looked at him with the expression that Harry was beginning to associate with the specific aftermath of being told a true thing after a long run of being told something else. The first confrontation with Dumbledore happened on a Friday, in his office, which Harry had been summoned to with the particular politeness that was itself a form of authority. The office was everything Harry had expected, cluttered, layered, smelling of something sweet and smoky, with Fawkes the Phoenix making small melodic comments in the background and the silver instruments on every surface ticking and turning. The portraits of former headmasters watched with varying degrees of interest. Dumbledore offered him a lemon drop. Harry declined. "I wanted to speak with you," Dumbledore said, settling behind his desk with the air of a man who was comfortable in this room in a way that was also a statement, about the pace at which certain information about you has been disseminated within the school community. "The students knowing who I am," Harry said. "The students knowing rather more than who you are." Dumbledore's tone was mild. "There is significant discussion, among both students and staff, regarding your legal standing. Your inheritance. The nature of the Founder's Charter claim." He folded his hands. "Some of that information appears to have come from the Gringotts notification that was distributed to Wizengamot members last spring." "The notification was public record," Harry said. "It was lodged as part of the guardianship resolution." "Yes." A pause. "Harry, I want to be direct with you. Please. You have demonstrated, over the past 2 years, a remarkable ability and a remarkable maturity. I mean that sincerely." Dumbledore's eyes were doing that seeing thing, and Harry sat under it comfortably. "But Hogwarts operates within a structure that has served it and its students well for centuries. I would ask, not as a restriction, but as a request, between people who I believe both want what is best for this school, that you give that structure time to accommodate what you are, rather than moving faster than it can manage. Harry was quiet for a moment. He looked at the instruments on the desk, the portraits watching, the phoenix. He looked at Dumbledore and thought about the Edinburgh meeting and the warm, encompassing attention and the real love and the real insufficiency. With respect, he said, the structure you're asking me to move slowly around is the same structure that produced a 43% dropout rate for exceptional Muggle-born students. It's the same structure that convicted Sirius Black without a trial. It's the same structure that allowed me to grow up not knowing my parents left a will. He kept his voice even and his eyes on Dumbledore's. I'm not interested in damaging the school. I love this building. Genuinely. But I'm not going to pretend that slow is the same as respectful when what we're actually talking about is comfortable. The silence that followed had the quality of a space that was paying attention. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. The blue eyes were still doing the seeing thing but had added something new, a layer of something that looked, genuinely, like reassessment. What is it, Dumbledore said finally, and his voice was different now, quieter, more careful, that you intend to do? This year? Learn, Harry said. Get through first year. Build what I've started with Neville and Hermione. Understand the school itself more fully. He paused. There's something in the Chamber of Secrets that's connected to my bloodline. The Slytherin Vault documents reference it. I want to understand what it is before someone less equipped to handle it stumbles across it. Dumbledore went very still. I know about the chamber, Harry said. I know roughly where it is. I know it was opened 50 years ago and I know what happened. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. I'm not going to do anything reckless. I'm also not going to pretend it isn't there when I can feel it from here. He put his hand flat on the desk, and the castle moved, barely, a breath, the same thing Hermione had felt on the first night, but here in the center of the building it was considerably more distinct. The silver instruments on the desk spun suddenly and simultaneously for exactly 3 seconds and stopped. The portraits of former headmasters were all watching now, with total, uniform attention. Dumbledore looked at the instruments. He looked at Harry's hand on his desk. He looked at Harry. I see, Dumbledore said, very quietly. I thought you might, Harry said. He removed his hand. The room settled back into its normal hum. He stood up and Fawkes made a sound, not his normal trill, something lower, more complex, that ended more actions request aborted right the next chapter now. Chapter 4, Old Laws, New Moves. The Chamber of Secrets announced itself to Harry on a Thursday morning in October, between charms and lunch. He was walking back from the second floor with Hermione and Neville when the floor hummed, not physically, not in a way that would have registered on any instrument, but in the specific frequency he'd come to understand as the Slytherin resonance, the deep water note that ran through his bloodline like a second heartbeat. He stopped walking mid-stride. Hermione, who had been in mid-sentence about something Flitwick had demonstrated incorrectly, stopped too. Harry? It's down there, he said. He looked at the floor beneath his feet, the stone flags old and worn smooth by 1,000 years of students. 3 floors, maybe 4. Moving slightly northwest. He paused. Not a person. A presence. Neville said, what kind of presence? Old, Harry said. Trapped and old and very aware. He straightened up and started walking again. Not today. I need to do some reading first. But soon. Hermione caught up to him. The Slytherin line gives you some kind of, what, a detection capability. It's more like a relationship, Harry said. Salazar Slytherin built that chamber over 1,000 years ago as a place of deep magical study. His bloodline hears it. I hear it. He glanced at her. The creature down there isn't just a danger. It's also been down there alone for 1,000 years. I think that matters. It's a basilisk, Hermione said. She said it with the flat delivery of someone who had read the right book already. The creature. It has to be, based on the historical accounts of the incident in 1943, the method of attack, the petrifications. She'd been carrying a small notebook everywhere for the past 3 weeks and now she pulled it out and flipped several pages. King of Serpents. Lethal gaze, lethal venom, fatal to hear directly but survivable through reflections or indirect, you can talk to it, can't you? Parseltongue. Yes, Harry said. So the approach isn't combat. No, Harry said. It's a conversation. Neville looked thoughtful. Does it want to be down there? Almost certainly not, Harry said. But that's a question for when I go. They went to lunch. Harry had a bowl of soup and thought about the Deepwater note and what it meant that the castle itself seemed relieved when he acknowledged it, a subtle architectural exhale, the way a house feels different when someone comes home who was supposed to be there. The letter from the ministry arrived the second week of October, and it arrived not by owl but by ministry courier, a harried wizard in a formal blue cloak who appeared in the entrance hall on a Tuesday morning and handed it to McGonagall, who brought it to Harry during breakfast with an expression that suggested she had approximately 47 questions and was deploying the professional discipline of a lifetime to ask none of them. Harry opened it. Hermione read it over his shoulder without asking permission, which he'd already accepted as simply how Hermione operated. The letter was from the Office of Magical Governance. It was formal, precise, and addressed to Harry James Potter, Lord of the Sacred Nine, heir of Merlin, the full title, every word. It informed him that, per the Founders' Charter as lodged in Gringotts' original records and now formally ratified by the Wisengamot's Charter Subcommittee following his family heritage verification, certain governance rights pertaining to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry were considered legally active. The Hogwarts Board of Governors was hereby notified that any decision affecting the school's fundamental structure, curriculum, or staffing required acknowledgement of the Charter heir's standing. The seat of Merlin on the Wisengamot was formally open to him, to be occupied upon his legal majority or at his earlier request under supervised arrangements. 3 ministry departments, Magical Law Enforcement, Magical Education, and the Department of Mysteries, had submitted formal requests for an introductory meeting at his convenience. At the bottom, in neat handwriting that he recognized from previous correspondence, Amelia Bones, Department of Magical Law Enforcement. I'm looking forward to finally meeting you, Harry. And yes, I'm using your first name on purpose. He set the letter down and picked up his spoon and finished his soup. Ron Weasley, who had been eating next to Neville and clearly reading the letter from a polite distance that wasn't actually that polite, said, 3 ministry departments want to meet you. Yes, Harry said. You're 11. Nearly 12, actually. Ron stared at him. Ron stared in a particular way that Harry had come to appreciate. It was completely honest staring, the staring of someone who had no pretense in them and found the situation genuinely extraordinary rather than pretending not to. Ron Weasley was, Harry had decided in the first week, exactly what he'd seemed on the train, genuine, instinctive, fiercely loyal to the people he'd decided mattered, and much smarter than he gave himself credit for. He also had 6 older brothers and a completely different relationship with institutional authority than almost anyone else Harry had met, which was occasionally inconvenient and generally wonderful. What are you going to do with a Wisengamot seat? Ron asked. Eventually. A lot, Harry said. Right now I need to get through first-year transfiguration without turning my matchstick into something alarming. He paused. McGonagall is watching me in that class. She watches everyone in that class, Neville said. She watches me specifically, Harry said. She's trying to figure out whether I actually need the foundation material or whether making me do it anyway is a philosophical choice about educational structure. He considered. I think it's both, and I think she's right. Hermione looked up from the letter, which she'd been rereading. You should meet Bones first, she said. Of the 3 departments, she's the one with actual enforcement capability. The Department of Mysteries will want to study you, which isn't useful right now. Magical Education will want to restructure your curriculum, which is premature. But Bones can do things with the legal framework you've built that none of the others can. Harry looked at her. She had her notebook out already and was writing something with the focused intensity of a person who had been waiting for permission to be useful and had just received it. "Write it up," he said. "All 3 departments, what each one wants from the meeting, what's worth giving them, what's worth keeping. Prioritized." She was already writing. "Give me 2 days," she said. "You have 1. We meet with the solicitors on Friday." She looked up. "Fine. 1 day." She went back to writing without a trace of complaint, with the expression of someone who had found the altitude at which they were comfortable and was breathing easily for the first time. The Slytherin contingent found Harry on a Thursday afternoon in the second week of October, outside the library, which was either a strategic choice or a coincidence, and Harry wasn't sure which. Draco Malfoy was not someone who did coincidences. As far as Harry could tell, he had the manner of a boy whose family had been doing things deliberately for so many generations that even casual conversations arrived with an agenda. He was flanked by Crabbe and Goyle, who were more decoration than calculation, and he had the particular walk of someone who had been told since childhood that rooms adjusted to him and had decided to believe it. "Potter," Malfoy said, with the tone of someone who considered his use of your surname a generous familiarity. "Malfoy," Harry said. Malfoy stopped. He looked at Harry with the focused appraisal of someone who had been told things about this meeting by someone older and was now checking the instructions against reality. He had pointed features and pale eyes and the kind of fine clothes that announced themselves, and he was, Harry thought, genuinely intelligent in a way that had been almost entirely redirected into social strategy, which was a waste of a sharp mind. "My father says you've been making moves," Malfoy said. "Your father's been paying attention," Harry said. "That's sensible." A small pause. This was not the response the script had anticipated. "He thinks you're being managed by the goblins." "The goblins taught me the law," Harry said. "I make my own decisions." He looked at Malfoy with the same quality of attention he gave everyone, complete, evaluating, without hostility. "What do you actually want to say? Not what your father told you to find out. What do you want to know?" Malfoy's carefully maintained expression flickered. He was 11, despite the performance, and the question had bypassed the performance and addressed the person, which the performance was not designed to handle. "I want to know what you're planning," Malfoy said, and it came out slightly less polished than the rest had been. "For Hogwarts? For the legal situation generally?" "Both. At Hogwarts I'm going to learn as much as I can and use the Founders' Charter rights to make the school what it was supposed to be instead of what it's become," Harry said. "Legally I'm going to use the seat of Merlin to challenge legislation that's built on bad law. Eventually." He kept his tone conversational. "Some of that legislation your family has been very invested in maintaining. I'm not interested in punishing your family. I'm interested in getting rid of bad law." Malfoy was quiet for a moment. He was doing the calculation, Harry could see it, the factors going in, the factors coming out. "My father won't like that." "I know," Harry said. "But you're not your father. You're going to have to decide what you think about it yourself." He picked up his bag. "Your family has real knowledge, real political skill, and 1,000 years of history in this world. That's valuable. What you do with it is a choice." He started walking. "Tell your father I'm happy to meet with him when the time is appropriate. Through official channels." He walked away and heard Malfoy say something to Crabbe and Goyle behind him, too quiet to catch. He didn't need to catch it. He'd said what was true and useful, and Draco Malfoy's response to it was Draco Malfoy's to figure out. The meeting with Amelia Bones happened on a Saturday in late October, at a Hogsmeade location that Bones herself had suggested, a private room at the Three Broomsticks, arranged through the solicitors. She was a square-faced woman with a monocle and the professional bearing of someone who had built an institution within an institution through the quality of her work and the refusal to let that work be corrupted. Harry liked her immediately, which he'd expected to. She was accompanied by a legal aide who took notes in the corner and a junior auror whose function was, Harry judged, more ceremonial than security-related, the presence of a ministry officer to make the meeting official. Hermione had given him 8 pages of notes. He'd read them once and left them at the castle. Harry, Bones said, with the directness of someone who had no patience for preamble. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the first name thing, Harry said. It set a good tone. She almost smiled. I've been following your legal work for 18 months, she said. The Black case was a masterpiece of procedural challenge. Greengrass, Bones, and Crouch did excellent work, but the initial framing was yours. The framing was obvious, Harry said. The evidence for the conviction wasn't evidence. It just needed someone with standing to say so officially. You'd be surprised how rarely obvious things get said officially. She folded her hands on the table. I want to talk to you about 3 things. First, the Dementor situation at Azkaban. I'm building a case for reform. The use of Dementors as prison guards is a human rights violation under pre-charter magical law, and with your seat and your standing it's the kind of challenge that has teeth it didn't have before. She paused. Second, the Death Eater pardons of 1981. 14 individuals claimed the Imperious defense and walked free. I've had doubts about 6 of those cases for a decade. With a Merlin-level audit right, we could formally reopen them. She met his eyes. Third, and this one is more sensitive, there is an individual currently serving as a Hogwarts teacher who I have significant concerns about. I cannot move on those concerns without evidence I cannot obtain through standard channels. But a charter heir audit, Quirrell, Harry said. She stopped. The legal aid's quill paused. I know, Harry said. I've known since the first week. There's something wrong with him, not wrong like incompetent, wrong like occupied. Something's sharing that body with him and it's been trying not to be noticed. He had felt it at the sorting feast, the quality of Quirrell's gaze, too fixed, too interested, with a secondary layer that felt like the specific coldness of something that had been dead and wasn't quite. He'd spent 3 weeks reading around it. It's Voldemort. The word hit the room the way it always did, a sharp inhalation from the legal aid, the Auror's hand moving instinctively. You can say the name, Harry said, with mild patience, to the room generally. He's not a word with power. He's a man with choices, and a somewhat complicated current existence. He looked back at Bones. He's alive, or alive enough. He's been using Quirrell since at least the summer, possibly before. He's at this school because there's something here he wants. He folded his hands on the table. The Philosopher's Stone. Dumbledore's had it moved here for safekeeping. Bones was very still. You know about the stone. The Merlin vault has documents about it, Harry said. Nicholas Flamel and Merlin worked together for 3 years in the 14th century. The documents are detailed. He paused. I also confirmed it by asking the castle. Buildings know what's in them. You asked the castle, Bones said. The founder's bloodline gives me a communicative relationship with the building. It's like, imagine if you could ask a house how it was doing and it could answer. He shrugged. It's not complicated once you understand it. What's complicated is that Dumbledore has placed a stone that Voldemort wants in a school full of children and protected it with puzzles that a sufficiently motivated adult could solve in an afternoon. You've seen the protections. I've felt them. Some are excellent. Some are, he chose his word carefully, nostalgic. What are you planning to do about Quirrell? I've been watching him, Harry said. He's not ready to move yet. Whatever Voldemort needs requires something that isn't in place. But when he does move I'll be there. He looked at Bones steadily. I'd appreciate a Auror presence at Hogsmeade Station, discreetly. Not inside the school, that creates panic and gives Quirrell reason to accelerate his timeline. But nearby, with the right authorization to act if I send a signal. Bones studied him for a long moment. You're 11 years old, she said. It wasn't a protest. It was a statement that she was still processing. I know, Harry said. But I'm also the only person in this country whose magical resonance Voldemort can't replicate, whose bloodline he can't override, and whose connection to the castle gives him nowhere to hide inside it. He met her eyes. I'm not reckless. I'm not going to fight him alone in a corridor. But when the moment comes I need to be positioned correctly, and I need backup I can trust within range. The monocle caught the light when Bones tilted her head. You can trust me and my people, she said. Within the limits of what I can deploy without triggering ministry oversight that would compromise the whole operation. That's enough, Harry said. They spent the next 2 hours on the Azkaban question and the Death Eater pardons, and Harry found that talking to Amelia Bones was one of the more satisfying conversations he'd had. She thought fast and precisely, she didn't waste words, and when she agreed with something she said so directly, and when she disagreed she said that too. By the time they walked out into the Hogsmeade afternoon, he had commitments from her on the Dementor Reform preliminary inquiry and a formal request to her office from his solicitors that would open 2 of the 6 questionable imperious pardons for review. He walked back to the castle with his hands in his pockets and the October wind doing something aggressive with the trees on the edge of the forbidden forest, and felt the day's work settling comfortably in his chest like a well-placed stone in a wall. The chamber called to him on a Sunday morning in early November. Not metaphorically. It actually called, a vibration through the floors of the castle that came up through Harry's feet while he was walking and carried the specific quality of a very old thing that was tired of waiting. He was in the corridor near Moaning Myrtle's bathroom, which he knew from the vault documents was directly above the chamber's entrance, and he stopped and crouched and put his palm flat on the floor. I hear you, he thought, in Parseltongue, which came out as a sustained sibilation that no nearby observer would have found comforting. The response came back through the stone, old, vast, the equivalent of a creature turning its head slowly in the dark. Heir, it said. Harry closed his eyes for a moment. The basilisk was, by the vault documents' account, over 1,000 years old and had been alone in the dark for most of that time, except for a single 50-year-old period of activity that had ended badly and left it down there again. It was not evil. It was an animal. A deeply powerful, deeply ancient animal that had been used and confined and had spent a millennium waiting for someone to speak to it in its own language with something other than commands. Not today, Harry said aloud, in Parseltongue, in the empty corridor. But soon. I promise. The floor's vibration softened, the way something held tense softens when touched. He stood up and looked at Myrtle's bathroom door and thought about what it meant to keep a creature that size in a basement for 1,000 years and call it a legacy. He went back to the common room and wrote 3 letters, one to Ragnarok requesting the full Slytherin vault documentation on the chamber's design and original purpose, one to Mira asking specifically about magical creatures with Parseltongue relationship capacity and the ethics of their confinement under ancient law, and one to the solicitors about whether the basilisk, as a 1,000-year-old sentient magical creature, had any legal standing under pre-charter magical law that had been violated by its confinement. He sent all 3 and then opened his transfiguration homework because he had 3 feet of parchment due Monday morning and McGonagall marked with the precise mercilessness of someone who took the material personally. The Lucius Malfoy situation developed through November, not through direct contact but through the careful observation of how information moved. Harry had been watching the patterns, which Slytherin students went quiet after certain weekends at home, which owls arrived for Draco with specific frequency, what Draco's face did when he read them. He'd also been paying attention to the Board of Governors, whose correspondence with Dumbledore was apparently ongoing and increasingly strained since the Founders' Charter ratification. Lucius Malfoy was on the Board of Governors. Had been for years. He was, by every account, the single most influential voice on that board, not through official title but through the combination of money, social connection, and the specific political skill of a man who had survived the fall of Voldemort by claiming coercion and had spent the decades since rebuilding his position with methodical care. He was, in Harry's assessment, the smartest political operator in current Wizarding Britain, which was why he was also the most dangerous response to the Founders' Charter ratification. Because Lucius Malfoy understood, in a way that many people didn't yet, what the Founders' Charter actually meant. He understood it not as symbolism but as mechanism, as a genuine structural shift in the balance of institutional power that would, if properly exercised, dismantle the specific architecture of influence that he had spent 20 years constructing. Harry had not been subtle about the charter's implications. He'd asked the solicitors to make sure they were public record, clearly stated, accessible. Subtlety was a tool for people who needed something to remain unclear. Harry needed things to be clear. The letter from Malfoy arrived the third week of November, addressed formally and correctly to Lord Potter, bearing the Malfoy family seal in green and silver wax. Harry read it with the same careful attention he gave everything. It was beautifully written, warm without being sycophantic, direct without being aggressive, respectful without the specific flavor of respect that was actually condescension wearing a different coat. It expressed admiration for certain aspects of his legal work. It expressed, delicately, some concern about the pace of certain institutional changes. It invited him to a meeting, at his convenience, to discuss the future of wizarding governance from a perspective of, in Malfoy's exact phrase, generational responsibility. Harry read it twice and then gave it to Hermione. She read it once and said, "He's going to offer you an alliance." "Yes. He thinks you're movable," she said, with the expression of someone analyzing a calculation error. "He's treating you like someone who has power but doesn't know yet what he wants to do with it, and he's hoping to be in the room when you decide." "He's not entirely wrong that I'm still deciding some things," Harry said. "He's wrong about whether that makes me movable." He took the letter back. "I'm going to write back and say yes to the meeting." Hermione looked at him. "Not because I'm interested in what he's offering," Harry said. "Because I want to understand his position fully and I want him to understand mine, and I want that understanding to happen while we're both calm and the conversation is on record. It's harder to be Lucius Malfoy when the conversation is on record." "Where?" "Here," Harry said. "At Hogwarts. In a formal charter meeting, the Founders' Charter provides for it, I've already checked. A meeting of a charter heir and a board governor regarding institutional matters. It goes in the school record. Everything said is legally documented." He looked at Hermione with quiet satisfaction. "He'll accept because refusing a formal charter meeting is legally problematic. And then he'll be in a room with me on my terms and he'll have to be exactly who he actually is instead of who he presents as." Hermione leaned back in her chair with an expression that was trying to be neutral and not quite managing it. "That's rather elegant," she said. "I learned from a goblin," Harry said. "Goblins do not waste moves." The formal charter meeting happened on a grey Saturday in late November, in a room that the castle produced on Harry's request, not the room of requirement, but a room Harry hadn't known existed until the stones directed him to it, a meeting chamber 2 floors below the main corridors, hexagonal, with the founders' crests in the floor and walls that held the charter magic in them like a held breath. The room documented everything said within it, automatically, in the same way the Wizarding recording chambers did. Harry had looked up the mechanism in the Ravenclaw vault and confirmed it still worked. Lucius Malfoy arrived alone, which was itself a statement, a display of confidence and possibly a display of respect. He was tall, pale, immaculate in grey robes, with long blonde hair and the kind of face that had spent decades being carefully composed. He looked at Harry, 11 years old, in school robes, sitting at a hexagonal table with his hands folded, and something behind his eyes adjusted. The adjustment was fast and Harry nearly missed it. "Nearly." "Lord Potter," Malfoy said. He sat down without invitation, which was his own statement. "Mr. Malfoy," Harry said. "Thank you for coming." "I confess I was curious about this room," Malfoy said. He looked at the crests in the floor with the expression of someone who recognized old magic and was being careful about what they showed regarding their recognition. "I wasn't aware it existed." "Most people aren't," Harry said. "The castle knows a lot of things the current administration doesn't." A slight pause. "You have a remarkable relationship with this building." "I have a bloodline relationship with it," Harry said. "Which is different from a relationship, technically. It doesn't choose me. I'm just legible to it." He looked at Malfoy steadily. You wanted to talk about generational responsibility. I wanted to talk about the future, Malfoy said. His voice was smooth, warm, calibrated. You have emerged, Lord Potter, as the most significant figure in Wizarding Britain since, forgive the comparison, the Dark Lord's initial rise. The difference being that you represent an opportunity rather than a crisis. What you do with your standing will shape this world for the next 100 years. That is not hyperbole. I agree with you, Harry said. Malfoy blinked. He'd been prepared for something else. You're right that what I do will matter significantly, Harry continued. Where we likely disagree is about which direction it should go. He folded his hands on the table. The legislation you've supported on the board and in the Wizengamot over the past decade, the Muggleborn registration proposals, the blood status restrictions on certain ministry positions, the educational access tiering, I'm going to challenge all of it. Not because I want to damage your family. Because it's bad law built on false premises, and it actively harms people, and the seat of Merlin exists specifically to address that kind of structural problem. Malfoy was quiet. He was doing the thing Harry had noticed in the Edinburgh meeting with Dumbledore, the search for the handler, the adult hand, the script being followed. He found nothing because there was nothing, and the recalibration behind his eyes was more visible than he probably wanted. Those proposals were designed to protect, they were designed to preserve a specific distribution of power, Harry said, without heat. I've read the drafting histories. The intent is in the language. He paused. Mr. Malfoy, I'm not here to humiliate you or to make you a public example. I don't need to. What I want, which I'll be completely direct about, is for you to stop filing those proposals and stop funding the political campaigns that promote them. He met Malfoy's eyes. In exchange, I will not pursue the full scope of the Merlin-level audit that your family's political activity technically qualifies for. You have done things in the past decade that are in gray areas. I'm not interested in the gray areas. I'm interested in the future. The room was very quiet. The crests in the floor glowed faintly with the documentation magic. Malfoy looked at him for a long moment. The composed face was still composed, but something behind it was working very hard and not quite keeping up. You would be satisfied with, I would be satisfied with you making different choices going forward, Harry said. I'm not asking you to become someone different. I'm asking you to use what you're actually good at, which is politics and institutional knowledge, in directions that don't require keeping people smaller than they are. He leaned forward slightly. Your son is in my year. He's sharper than the people he surrounds himself with. That's a choice he's making because it's comfortable, not because it's right for him. The world I'm building is one where he won't have to make that trade. He paused. Think about whether that world is worth moving toward. He stood up. This meeting is on record, as you're aware. I appreciate your time. My solicitors will be in touch regarding the formal notification of the seat's position on the pending blood status legislation. He walked out of the hexagonal room and up the stairs and back into the castle proper, which was doing its breathing thing around him, warm, steady, ancient. He stood in the main corridor for a moment with his eyes closed and felt November through the stones and Lucius Malfoy sitting in that room below him recalculating the shape of the next decade. It was not victory. Not yet. But it was a stake in the ground, clearly placed, on record, in a room that had been waiting for 1,000 years to be used this way. He went to find Hermione and Neville. They were in the room of requirement, where they usually were on Saturday afternoons, Hermione deep in something theoretical, Neville coaxing extraordinary things from the growing table, the room filling with the smell of green growing things in the middle of grey November. Harry came in and sat down and Hermione looked at him with her measuring look. How did it go? She asked. He listened, Harry said. Which is more than most people do. He picked up the book she'd set aside and looked at the cover. The Architecture of Ancient Wards, a Practical Study. He opened it. Neville, that thing you're growing in the corner, what is it? Devil's Snare, Neville said, without looking up. But I've been talking to it about light responses. I think I can adjust the reflex. Harry looked at the plant, which was slow and dark and muscular in its pot, and at Neville's hands in it, and at the faint green glow. He thought about the Hufflepuff resonance, building magic, growing magic, the thing that made more of things. He thought about a boy who'd been told his magic wasn't impressive, sitting with his hands in the earth, adjusting the reflexes of an ancient magical plant through conversation. Keep going, Harry said. That might matter later. Neville just nodded and kept his hands in the soil, and the plant moved slowly around him like something that understood it was safe, and the room was warm with November light and the smell of growing things, and Harry read about ward architecture with his feet on the floor of a room that had never refused anyone what they genuinely needed, and thought about traps and timing and the specific patience required to let something develop until the moment you needed it was exactly the right moment. He thought about Quirrell and the something behind his eyes, and the stone somewhere in the floors below, and the word Bones had said, positioned correctly. He had 3 floors of wards to understand, a basilisk to speak to, and a conversation with a possessed professor that was probably coming before Christmas. He needed all of it ready. Not because he was afraid of any of it, but because the best moves were the ones you made when you were ready, not when the situation forced your hand. He turned the page and read, and the castle breathed around him, and outside the windows November was doing its grey, honest work. Chapter 5. The Sovereign's first word. Quirrell moved on a Tuesday night in December, 3 days before the end of term. Harry knew he was going to before he did. The castle told him, not in words, not even in vibration, but in the specific way a building changes when something wrong is happening inside it. The torches on the 3rd floor corridor burned lower at 10:30. The stones shifted their temperature, the way a body does when it's trying to fight something off. Harry was already awake, sitting on his bed in the dark with his shoes on and his wand in his hand, because he'd been awake for an hour before it happened, feeling the castle's growing discomfort like a pressure behind his eyes. He knocked once on Neville's curtain. "Stay here," he said quietly. "If I'm not back by midnight, send the red sparks." Neville, who was also already awake because Neville had developed his own relationship with the castle over 3 months and the building was apparently not subtle about expressing distress, said, "The signal goes to Bones." "Bones and Ragnarok both," Harry said. "The contact protocols are in the notebook in my top drawer. Don't go looking for me." "I mean that." "I know you mean it," Neville said. He was sitting up in bed with the particular calm of someone who had decided to be brave in the quiet way rather than the loud way. "Be careful." "Careful's not quite the right word," Harry said. "Precise." "I'm going to be precise." He slipped out of the dormitory and into the common room, where Hermione was sitting in the chair by the fire with her own wand out and Hogwarts, a history open on the cushion beside her. She looked at him with an expression that was 3 parts alarm and 1 part the specific anticipation of someone who had been running scenarios in their head for 2 months. "It's tonight," Harry said. "I know. The torches." She stood up. "I'm coming." "Hermione, I've memorized the ward architecture of all 3 protective layers between the 3rd floor corridor and the stone's chamber," she said. "I know the Devil's Snare variant Neville's been developing and how to counteract it if it behaves differently than expected. I know the logic of the chess enchantment on the 5th barrier and I've worked out 3 alternative solutions for the mirror." She picked up the book and put it under her arm with the decisive energy of someone who had prepared for the argument they were about to win. "Tell me I'm not useful." Harry looked at her for a moment. "I wasn't going to," he said. "I was going to say be ready for it to move fast." She exhaled. "Right. Yes. Fast." She tucked her wand up her sleeve. "Lead." The 3rd floor corridor was quiet and wrong in equal measure. The torches here had gone out entirely, not dimmed, extinguished, which was the building's equivalent of holding its breath. The door at the corridor's end stood slightly open, which meant Quirrell had already been through it, and Harry pushed through without hesitating into the room beyond. The Cerberus, Fluffy, Dumbledore had named it, which said something about the man's sense of humor, was asleep, which meant the music had already been played. Harry glanced at the harp in the corner, still vibrating faintly on the last note of whatever enchantment had been used, and stepped past the sleeping dog toward the trapdoor in the floor without breaking stride. "He's maybe 10 minutes ahead of us," Harry said. He dropped through the trapdoor into darkness and caught himself with a cushioning charm before he hit the plant below, the Devil's Snare, which lunged immediately and then went still, the way Neville's variant had been trained to, recognizing something in Harry's magical signature that it associated with safety. Hermione dropped down behind him and the plant reached for her, and Harry said, in the particular tone he used when talking to growing things since developing the Hufflepuff resonance, something low and calming, and the plant retracted. "That was," Hermione said. "Later," Harry said. They moved. The winged keys were scattered and frantic in the second chamber, clearly disturbed by Quirrell's passage. Harry didn't bother with a broom. He stood in the center of the room, extended his hand, and drew on the Ravenclaw resonance, clarity, precision, the ability to find the signal in the noise, and held very still. Every key in the room went still too, hovering. He felt for the right one the way you feel for a word on the tip of your tongue and found it, an old key, battered and mended, tucked into the corner of the ceiling trying to look unimportant. He plucked it out of the air. They were through the door in 90 seconds. The chess room was worse. The pieces were in combat formation, still rearranging from Quirrell's forced passage through them, several were destroyed, the board was chaos, and the path through it was closed. Harry looked at it and went still in the way he went still when he was reading a problem. Not the chess pieces, not the board pattern, but the enchantment itself. It was a Gryffindor resonance lock, which was why brute force had always been the intended solution. "Courage," the enchantment said. "Move through the danger." He walked directly toward the opposing king. The pieces swung to face him, and Harry said, quietly, in the language the enchantment's magic understood, not Parseltongue, not any human language, but the specific frequency of the Gryffindor bloodline that was essentially the magical equivalent of "I belong here and you know it," and every piece on the board lowered its weapon simultaneously and stepped aside. Hermione made a sound. "Don't overthink it," Harry said. "You just spoke to the chess pieces. The enchantment has a founder's override. It recognizes the bloodline." He walked through the gap the pieces had made. Gryffindor built the lock. He built in a way to open it that wasn't combat. He always said there should be a way through that didn't require hurting anything. "That's not in Hogwarts, a history," Hermione said. "It's in his journal," Harry said. She followed him through, the pieces still and watchful, and they went through the next door into the troll room, the troll already unconscious, Quirrell's work, and through that into the potion room, where 6 bottles sat on a table with a rolled parchment and the fire barriers burned at each end. Hermione read the puzzle in 30 seconds flat. She pointed to the second smallest bottle. "That one, 4 forward," she said. "It's cold. You can feel the ice resonance from here. The others have been," she paused, checking. He took the forward bottle. "There's only a small amount left. 1 person." Harry picked it up. It was ice cold against his palm. He looked at Hermione. "Go back," he said. "Take Ron and get McGonagall. Not Dumbledore, I need someone who'll respond to what's actually happening rather than what they expected to happen. McGonagall. Tell her exactly where I am and what's ahead. Harry, Hermione." He said it with the patient certainty that meant he'd thought it through and wasn't being self-sacrificial, just precise. "Quirrell is 1 person. What's in Quirrell is 1 person, damaged and diminished and without a proper body. I am the heir of 9 founders and Merlin, and I have 3 years of the best magical training in this country. The numbers are not what they look like." He held her gaze. "I need backup I trust within range when this is over. That's you, with McGonagall, coming through behind me. That's the job." She was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Long enough to run the scenario, check it, find it sound. "You'd better be right about the numbers," she said. "I'm always right about the numbers." She grabbed his arm, briefly and hard, and then she turned and went back through the fire without another word, and Harry drank the ice-cold potion and stepped forward into the flame and through it and into the last room. The mirror of Eriste stood at the far end of the chamber, massive and ornate and radiating an enchantment that Harry felt in his chest the way you feel bass from a speaker, not heard, experienced. Quirrell was standing in front of it with his hands at his sides and his shoulders rigid with the effort of looking at it, and his reflection in the mirror was doing something his actual body was not. "The mirror sees what you desire most," Harry said, from the doorway. Quirrell spun. His face cycled through several expressions: surprise, calculation, fear of the wrong kind, and settled into something that was trying for menace and falling slightly short. "Potter." "Professor," Harry said. He walked into the room at a normal pace, looking at the mirror rather than Quirrell. "The Philosopher's Stone is in there. But you can't reach it from outside the glass because Dumbledore built the enchantment to give the stone only to someone who wants it but doesn't want to use it." He looked at the mirror, at the reflection of Quirrell's desperate, wanting face, and thought, the thing sharing that body wants very much, and knows it, and that's why it's stuck. He can't take it out. "Perhaps," said a voice, and it was not Quirrell's voice, it was the voice behind Quirrell's voice, thin and cold and carrying the specific quality of something that had existed for a long time in a form it was not designed for. "But you could." The back of Quirrell's head turned. Harry had known this was how it worked. The Slytherin Vault documents had detailed Voldemort's Horcrux theory, and the implications of a soul fragment attached to a living host were not obscure once you knew what to look for. What he hadn't quite expected was the face, the white, noseless face on the back of Quirrell's skull, with red eyes that held the specific flat intensity of something that had decided it was beyond human categories. "I could," Harry said agreeably. "Then do so," Voldemort said. "Give it to me and live. We can come to an arrangement. Your bloodline, do you understand what you carry? Do you understand what we could?" "I understand what I carry," Harry said. He moved to stand in front of the mirror, looking at his reflection. In the glass he saw himself, but differently, not a wish fulfilled, not an imagined future, but something the mirror found when it looked at him and discovered that what he desired most he was already becoming. The figure in the mirror was simply him, standing straight, with the 9 resonances visible in the reflection the way they were visible to no ordinary eye, threads of light, all different, all his. The reflection met his eyes and nodded once, and Harry looked away from it and back at Quirrell. "I understand it better than you do. That's the problem with your plan." "Give me the stone," Voldemort said. The voice had dropped the negotiating tone. "I have waited 11 years. I have endured 11 years. I will not be stopped by a child." "You've been stopped by worse than a child," Harry said. "You were stopped by my mother, who didn't even have a wand in her hand at the time." He kept his voice level. "I'm not going to give you the stone. I'm also not going to fight you in this room, which is what you're expecting. I don't need to." He turned to face Quirrell directly and put his hand flat on the floor, the gesture that had become automatic, the way he addressed the castle. He felt the building respond immediately, massively, the full attention of a 1,000-year-old magical structure that had just had its charter heir tell it exactly where the threat was. The room changed. Not dramatically, no lightning, no earthquake. The walls simply became more themselves, the founder's magic in the stone reasserting itself, layer over layer over layer, responding to the bloodline like tumblers in a very old lock. The enchantment of the room, which had been Dumbledore's construction, was absorbed back into the older enchantment beneath it, the Founder's enchantment, which Harry had known about since October and had spent 3 weeks quietly studying in preparation for exactly this moment. The Founder's enchantment did one thing: it made the room inhospitable to magic that violated the school's fundamental purpose. Magic bent toward harm. Magic that wanted to possess, destroy, consume. Quirrell staggered. Voldemort made a sound that was not quite human. "The castle is rejecting you," Harry said. "Not me. It. This building was made by people who cared what it stood for, and what it stands for and what you are not compatible." He watched Quirrell's body convulsing slightly as the chamber's magic tightened. I'm not doing this. I'm just the one who knew how to ask. Stop, Quirrell gasped, and it was Quirrell's voice now, not the voice behind it, and Harry heard in it the specific anguish of a man who had made choices he couldn't unmake and was now living in the last room those choices had led him to. I can't stop it, Harry said, and kept his voice even but let some truth into it. The building won't stop once it starts. But I can get you out. He held out his hand. Come toward me. Away from the mirror. Come toward the door. He won't let me, he doesn't have a body, Harry said. He has borrowed yours and he's been borrowing it for months and you are still in there, Quirinus. Come toward the door. Quirrell took one step. The voice behind his voice screamed, thin, cold, the scream of something losing its purchase, and Quirrell took another step, his body moving with the terrible effort of a man walking against a current that was pulling him the other way. Harry kept his hand extended. Not a spell, not a ward. Just a hand, held out, because sometimes the thing a person needed was someone to walk toward. Quirrell's hand closed around Harry's. The contact was extraordinary. Harry felt the Merlin resonance flare, the deep layer, the bedrock magic, and felt it meet whatever Voldemort's fragment was, and the fragment recoiled the way a burn recoils from water. It wasn't painful for Harry. It was clarifying, the way cold air is clarifying, the exact feeling of two things that were fundamentally incompatible acknowledging the fact. Voldemort's hold on Quirrell cracked like ice and the fragment tore free of its host, and Harry felt it pass through the room like a cold wind, and then it was gone, dispersed by the chamber's founder's magic into something that was no longer a coherent presence. Quirrell collapsed. Harry caught him, which was awkward because Quirrell was significantly larger than him, but he got an arm under him and lowered him to the floor. Quirrell's face was his own again, gaunt, sweating, the face of someone who had been very ill for a very long time and had just, violently, stopped. The stone, Quirrell whispered. Stays where it is, Harry said. He was still holding Quirrell's hand. The mirror behind them was dark, its enchantment, with the threat removed, had quieted. Don't worry about the stone. I thought, Quirrell's eyes were finding focus. I thought it would be worth it. The things he promised, I know, Harry said. He did know. He'd read enough history to understand the specific anatomy of the bargain Voldemort offered, the knowledge, the power, the sense of finally being seen as important by something that had always found you forgettable. The tragedy of Quirinus Quirrell was not that he was stupid or cruel. It was that he had been lonely and overlooked and had been offered a very convincing answer to both of those problems. You're going to be all right. Quirrell looked up at him with the expression of a man who found this claim difficult to believe but wanted to. How are you so? He stopped. Calm. Harry said. Young, Quirrell said. Harry didn't answer that. He heard footsteps on the other side of the flame barrier, the distinctive quick step of someone who had been moving fast and was not out of breath despite it, which meant McGonagall, and sat back on his heels and looked at the stone still somewhere inside the mirror's impossible geometry, still safe, still exactly where it needed to be. McGonagall came through with Hermione behind her and 3 castle portraits worth of guidance about where they were and what they'd find. She took in Quirrell on the floor, Harry sitting beside him, the mirror dark and quiet, the room's magic still gently thrumming with the after-effect of the Founder's enchantment, and her expression did several things in rapid succession before settling into the controlled competence of someone who had decided understanding could come later. Mr. Potter, she said. He needs medical attention, Harry said, standing. He was a willing host initially but the fragment's departure will have, I can see that, McGonagall said crisply. She was already kneeling beside Quirrell, her wand out. Miss Granger, go up and get Madame Pomfrey. Tell her exactly what happened. Leave nothing out. She looked at Harry over her shoulder. And you? Yes. Sit down before you fall down. Harry, who had not been aware he was swaying slightly, sat down. He wasn't hurt. He was tired in the way that using the Merlin resonance at full depth made him tired, a bone-deep exhaustion, the feeling of having drawn on something very fundamental and used a lot of it. He sat on the stone floor and breathed and felt the castle settling around him, the tension of the past hour releasing from the walls like a long exhale. The torches came back on in the corridor above, he could feel it through the stone. McGonagall sat back from Quirrell, who was breathing steadily if shallowly, and looked at Harry properly. She had a look he hadn't seen from her before. She wore many expressions, most of them controlled, but this one was doing something around the edges that it wasn't managing to contain. Voldemort's fragment is gone, Harry said. Dispersed by the chamber's founder's magic. It wasn't destroyed. I don't think it can be destroyed that way, but it's not coherent enough to act for a long time. He paused. There are other fragments. I don't know how many yet, but the dispersal of this one will have registered on the others. It's going to accelerate things. He looked up at her. That conversation needs to happen with Dumbledore. Tonight, if possible. McGonagall looked at him for a long moment. You're telling me, she said, carefully, that you've determined the dispersal of this possession will have consequences for multiple other magical objects. Yes. At 11 years old. Nearly 12, Harry said. Professor, I know how it sounds. But I've had access to information that, I don't doubt you, McGonagall said. She said it with the precise abruptness of someone for whom the words cost something. That is not what I was expressing. She was quiet for a moment. I was your mother's teacher. And your father's. I want you to know that. Harry said nothing for a moment. What were they like? As students? The question seemed to catch her off guard, the same way Dumbledore had been caught off guard by it, the same way Sirius had, the same way all of them were, because they expected tactics and instead got hunger. She looked at him and whatever was happening around the edges of her expression let go a little. Your mother was extraordinary, she said. Brilliant and precise and furious when she was wronged, which was not infrequently. Your father was, she paused, as though selecting from a very large catalogue. Your father made me want to be a better teacher for the first 3 years. He showed me every gap in my approach to students who were too gifted for the standard track. I wanted to throttle him for most of 4th year and then he turned into someone remarkable in 5th and I had to revise my entire assessment. She paused. You have both of them in you. The precision and the disruption. It's extremely inconvenient. I imagine it is, Harry said. I imagine it is going to continue to be, she said, and there was something in her voice now that was not quite warmth. McGonagall's warmth didn't present itself conventionally, but was the specific quality of someone who had decided to be on your side and was letting you know in the most understated way available to them. Hermione came back with Pomfrey and the room became briefly medical and efficient, and Harry gave a full account to McGonagall while Pomfrey worked on Quirrell, and the castle's torches all came back on floor by floor in the way that Harry had come to understand as the building's equivalent of standing up straight. Dumbledore arrived at midnight. Harry was in the hospital wing by then. Pomfrey had insisted, not because he was injured but because he was 11 and had been in a magical confrontation and his core needed monitoring, and Harry had accepted this reasoning without argument because Pomfrey was right and arguing with Pomfrey was, as far as he could tell, never worth it. He was sitting up in a hospital bed with a cup of something warm when Dumbledore came in, moving with more speed than Harry had seen from him before. The headmaster's usual measured pace had been replaced by something more urgent, and his face, when he appeared in the doorway, was the face of a man who had run several calculations very quickly and found that they'd all come out differently than expected. He looked at Harry sitting up, not visibly hurt, holding a warm cup with the equanimity of someone who had had a long day rather than someone who had just dispersed a Voldemort fragment in the school basement. He looked for a long time. You're all right, Dumbledore said. Yes, Harry said. You used the Founder's Chamber enchantment. You knew it was there, Harry said. It wasn't an accusation. You built your protection above it. You knew the original Founder's magic was still active. Dumbledore sat down in the chair beside Harry's bed, the visitor's chair, which was interesting. He was putting himself at Harry's level, physically. Whether it was deliberate or not, Harry appreciated it. I knew it was there, Dumbledore confirmed. I did not know if it would respond to you. I suspected. I hoped. He was quiet for a moment. I have not been honest with you about everything. I know, Harry said. There are things you've been waiting to tell me when you thought I was ready. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. Tell me now. So Dumbledore told him. About the prophecy, which Harry already knew, from the solicitors, from Bones, from the vault documents, but which landed differently in the telling, in the old man's voice, with the weight of all the years the knowledge had been carried. About the night Harry's parents died, and the choice Dumbledore had made, and the reasoning behind it, the blood protection, Lily's sacrifice, the specific magical principle that Dumbledore had believed would keep Harry safe at Privet Drive. About the Horcruxes, which Dumbledore did not know the full count of but suspected numbered several. About the plan, the long, carefully constructed plan that had governed every decision Dumbledore had made for 10 years and that Harry now, hearing it laid out, could see clearly, a plan in which Harry was simultaneously its most important component and its most carefully controlled one. A plan in which Harry was, ultimately, meant to die. The room was very quiet when Dumbledore finished. A sacrificial lamb, Harry said, without particular heat. Not, Dumbledore stopped. The magic of sacrifice is the most powerful magic there is. Your mother proved that. I believe that if it came to it, if the final Horcrux, he stopped again. He was looking at Harry with the expression of a man who had been certain and was no longer certain and was in the process of understanding the difference between the two. I thought I was preparing you. You were preparing me to die, Harry said. For a plan I didn't know I was part of, for a sacrifice I hadn't agreed to, for a war that was started by choices adults made before I was born. He kept his voice even. Not because he didn't feel the size of it, but because feeling the size of it and losing control of it were different things. I'm not angry with you about the plan. I understand why you made it. You were doing what you thought the math required. But? Dumbledore said. But it was my life, Harry said. And it should have been my choice. The silence that followed was the kind that holds something in it, a reckoning, the specific weight of a very intelligent man confronting a very large mistake. Dumbledore looked old, Harry thought. Not in the way he usually looked old, the theatrical old, the robes and beard old, but actually old. The old of someone who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had just been shown that the load was heavier than they'd thought. Yes, Dumbledore said quietly. It should have. The Horcruxes, Harry said. How many do you think? 6, possibly 7 including himself. Dumbledore's voice was back to professional, which was probably a relief to both of them. The diary is already confirmed destroyed. Tom Riddle's diary was used in 1943 at Hogwarts. Lucius Malfoy has it currently. The ring belonged to the Gaunt family. He paused. There are others I only suspect. The locket, Harry said. The cup. The snake. He saw Dumbledore's expression and continued. The Slytherin vault has documentation on all 7. Salazar Slytherin anticipated that his line would eventually produce someone who'd attempt it. He didn't intend it as approval. He left a record of the theory and what he believed the practical applications would be, as a warning. He looked at Dumbledore. And the diary needs to be retrieved from Malfoy. Tonight, if possible, before he knows what happened here and disposes of it. I'll contact the Ministry immediately, Bones, Harry said. Not the standard channel. Bones directly. She has authorization protocols for urgent evidence retrieval. She's been briefed on the Malfoy situation. He paused. I set that up in October. Dumbledore looked at him. There was something in the blue eyes that was not quite what it usually was, the comprehensive, managing attention that Harry had become accustomed to had developed a new note. Something that looked, despite everything, like relief. You've been preparing for this since before you arrived, Dumbledore said. I've been preparing since I was 8, Harry said. Which is when someone should have started preparing me. He said it without cruelty. Just plainly, in the way that something true is said, stated as a fact for the record, not as a wound. Dumbledore received it as it was meant, and nodded once, and for the first time in the 2 years Harry had known him, the old wizard looked like someone who might, given time, change. "I would like," Dumbledore said, "to work with you. Not around you." "Not," he stopped. Restarted. "I have spent a very long time believing I was the only one who could see the full picture. I was probably wrong about that for longer than I'd like to admit." "You're good at seeing pictures," Harry said. "You're just used to painting them yourself." He pulled his feet under him and sat cross-legged on the hospital bed. "Tell me everything you know about each of the Horcruxes. Location, construction, method of destruction. Everything." He looked at Dumbledore steadily. "Not when you think I'm ready. Now." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, the full weight of everything he was, all the wisdom and the failure and the genuine love that had expressed itself so badly for so long, and then he opened his mouth and began to tell the truth. They talked until 4 in the morning. Pomfrey came by at 2 and tried to send Dumbledore away, and Dumbledore, who was the headmaster and had been avoiding things for a decade, told her with great politeness that he was fine. She told him with great certainty that she didn't care whether he was fine, and Harry told her that he needed the information, and she relented, grumbling, and left a second warm drink on the table. Harry drank it and listened and asked questions and remembered everything, storing it all in the careful way he'd developed over 3 years of learning, not just the facts but the spaces between them, the places where the knowledge had gaps, the places where Dumbledore's confidence was slightly more than his evidence warranted. He found 4 gaps. He flagged all 4. Dumbledore, to his credit, acknowledged 3 of them immediately and sat with the 4th, turning it over, arriving at the same uncertainty by a different route. "The 4th Horcrux," Harry said, at 3:30. "You think it's at Hogwarts? In the castle itself?" "I think it's possible," Dumbledore said. "Something of Rowena Ravenclaw's. A diadem. But it's been missing for centuries and, it's in the room of requirement," Harry said. "In the hiding section. The room that people use to conceal things." He'd felt it, briefly, once, in October, a cold wrong note under the room's surface magic that he'd clocked and filed. "I'll retrieve it." "Harry, a Horcrux is dangerous," Harry said. "I know. I'm not going to destroy it myself. I'm going to secure it for Dumbledore. There's a basilisk venom application documented in the Slytherin vault that works. The Fong specifically. I need to speak to the basilisk anyway." He looked at Dumbledore's expression. "I told you about the chamber in September." "I thought you meant eventually," Dumbledore said. "I meant December, probably," Harry said. "The basilisk has been alone for 1,000 years. It needs to be spoken to, and its confinement needs to be addressed, and I'm the only person who can do both." He paused. "The solicitors have already filed a preliminary inquiry under ancient magical law about the legality of its confinement. It's a sentient magical creature held without consent. That needs to be resolved." Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. "You filed a legal challenge," he said, "on behalf of the basilisk." "Someone had to," Harry said. The end of term came and went, and then December became January, and Harry went to the Chamber of Secrets on a Sunday morning when the school was quiet and cold, walking down to Myrtle's bathroom alone with his hand on the wall and the castle's attention around him like something warm. The entrance opened for him before he spoke, the sink sliding aside at his approach, recognizing him the way all the doors in this building recognized him now, which still gave him a satisfaction that he figured he'd never get entirely tired of. He climbed down the pipe and walked through the tunnels toward the chamber's main gate without the tension he'd have felt a year ago, because he knew what was waiting, and it had been waiting a long time for him specifically. The gate opened. He walked into the chamber. The basilisk was enormous. He'd known it intellectually from the vault documents, but knowing and standing at the far end of a flooded underground chamber looking at 60 feet of ancient serpent were different calibrations of the same fact. It filled the chamber the way water fills the shape it's poured into, massive and unhurried, and its eyes were closed, he'd confirmed the closed-eye approach before coming. The eyes were only lethal when open and directed, and its scales in the chamber's dim light were the deep green of water at night. It lifted its head at his approach. Slow. Ancient. The movement of something that had learned that nothing required hurry. Heir, it said, in Parseltongue. The same word it had said through the floor. But different now, fuller, present, the word of something that was looking at the thing it had said the word about rather than sensing it at a distance. I'm here, Harry said. The head swung toward him. The eyes stayed closed. Long, it said. Long waited. I know, Harry said. I'm sorry it took this long. There was a long pause. You smell of all of them, the basilisk said. The founder. All founders. Old blood. Yes, Harry said. That's what I am. What will you do with me? The question was not fearful. It was genuinely curious, the curiosity of something that had been in the dark long enough to have no expectations. I'm working on the legal case, Harry said. You shouldn't be here. Not like this. You shouldn't be confined against your will. He paused, because the next part was the harder part. But I need to ask something of you first. There's an object in this school that holds a piece of something very dark. I need a Fong to destroy it. I'm asking, not commanding. The basilisk was still for a long moment. You ask, it said, slowly. The Heir asks. Does not command. I will never command you, Harry said. You're not a weapon. You're a being. The massive head lowered. The movement was, Harry had no better word for it, humble. Not submissive. Humble, in the specific way of something very powerful choosing to be small for a moment. A single Fong, already shed and lying on the chamber floor, slid toward his feet through the water. Take it, the basilisk said. For the asking alone, I would give more. Harry picked up the Fong. It was longer than his forearm and cold and humming with a venom that his Merlin resonance recognized as ancient and absolute. He held it carefully. He looked up at the basilisk's closed eyes, at the shape of something that had been alone in the dark for 10 centuries. I'll be back, he said. When the legal case is resolved. And it will be resolved. I know, the basilisk said. The castle told me. When you first walked in the door, in September, the stones spoke. A pause. They said, the heir has come. The long wait is over. Harry stood in the flooded chamber with the Fong in his hand and the chamber's cold water around his feet and felt, for a moment, the full weight of what 9 names actually meant, not the power, not the legal standing, not the Wizengamot seat, but the age of it, the depth of it, the specific responsibility of being the point where 1,000 years of separated things were finally flowing together. It was not a comfortable feeling. It was not supposed to be. He walked back through the chamber and up the pipe and into the grey January light of a Scottish castle morning. The Wizengamot session was in March. Harry attended his first full session not as an observer but as the holder of the seat of Merlin, accompanied by his solicitors and by Sirius, who had insisted on being present with an energy that Harry had found endearing and had not argued with because Sirius's presence was not decorative. The man had spent 10 years in Azkaban thinking about the exact corruption of the process that had put him there, and his testimony in the preliminary session had been one of the more devastatingly effective pieces of witness account the legal team had ever recorded. The Wizengamot chamber was old and round and serious, its tiered seating filled with members in plum robes, and at the center of it was a seat that had not been sat in for 500 years, the seat of Merlin, carved from a single piece of dark stone, with the 9-pointed star worked into its back and the founder's crest at its base. Harry walked to it through the chamber in Hogwarts robes. He'd considered wearing something else and decided against it, because he was a student of this school and the school was part of what he was, and sat down. The room was very quiet. He looked out at the Wizengamot. He found faces he recognized, Bones, in her official seat, with her monocle and her steady expression. 3 members who had been associated with the Malfoy political bloc, sitting with the specific careful neutrality of people who had recently reconsidered their positions. Dumbledore in the chief warlock seat, watching Harry with the complicated expression that had replaced the managing one since December. Two members he didn't recognize who were watching him with the wide eyes of people confronting something they'd read about but hadn't quite believed. And Lucius Malfoy, in his governor's observing seat at the edge of the chamber, watching with the contained, assessing expression of a man who had been in a hexagonal room with Harry and had spent 4 months thinking about what had been said there. Harry put his hands on the arms of the seat of Merlin. The stone was warm, which it hadn't been for anyone else in 5 centuries. The 9 resonances moved through him in sequence, steady as breathing. He had 3 items on the agenda that his solicitors had filed. The first was the formal introduction of the seat's return, which was procedural but symbolically enormous and everyone in the room knew it. The second was the opening motion on Azkaban Dementor reform, not the full legislation yet, the opening motion, the placing of the argument on the official record in a way that would require formal response. The third was the challenge to the first of the blood status restriction proposals, the one that Lucius Malfoy's political network had been developing for 18 months. He had prepared. He had prepared exhaustively, with Ragnarok and with Hermione and with Bones and with the solicitors, and the preparation sat in him like good ballast, solid, distributed, making him steady rather than heavy. He was not nervous. He was focused, which was different, and the difference showed in how he sat. The session opened. The formalities moved through their expected stages. And then the chief warlock, Dumbledore, said, in the tone of someone marking a genuine historical moment, "The seat of Merlin is formally occupied. The holder is recognized. Does the holder wish to address the chamber?" Harry stood. The room was absolutely silent. "My name is Harry Potter," he said. His voice in the chamber was clear and unhurried. "I am 11 years old. I know that is not what this seat has historically looked like, and I understand if that causes some adjustment. But the seat's criteria are bloodline and resonance, not age, and I have both, and the work in front of this body doesn't wait for me to grow up." He looked out at the chamber. He did not look at any one face. He let his attention be general, the way the castle's attention was general, present everywhere, leaving no one unseen. "I want to tell you what I intend to do with this seat, because I think you deserve directness rather than politics. I intend to use it for exactly what it was built for, to challenge laws that conflict with magical principle, to represent the foundational purpose of this institution when that purpose has been forgotten or abandoned, and to do it with evidence and argument rather than with force." He paused. "I don't want to make enemies here. I want to make law. Good law, carefully made, that serves the actual magical world rather than the comfortable version of it that some people have found convenient to maintain." He sat back down. The silence held for 3 seconds. Then Amelia Bones said, from her seat, "Motion seconded." It was the wrong procedural moment for a second. Technically she was seconding something that hadn't been moved yet, and it caused a ripple of reaction around the chamber, some of it confused and some of it amused and all of it alive. Harry caught the edge of a smile on Bones's face, small and deliberate. She'd done it on purpose, he realized, had cut the ceremony with something real and slightly off-script, to reset the room's energy from reverent to functional. He appreciated the move enormously. The session proceeded. The Dementor reform motion passed into formal consideration, which required 3 supporting votes from the floor beyond Harry's own introduction. It got 7, 2 of which surprised him and 1 of which surprised everyone in the room including the member who cast it, a stout witch from the Midlands who had been in the chamber for 30 years and looked slightly astonished at herself. The blood status challenge was entered into the formal record over the objections of 2 members whose objections Harry answered precisely, not dismissively, point by point, citing precedent, citing charter law, citing the specific drafting history that showed where the intent and the stated purpose of the proposal diverged. He answered them the way Ragnarok had taught him to answer things, completely, without hurry, without the performance of confidence that was really anxiety with better posture, just the actual confidence of someone who had done the work. Lucius Malfoy, in his observer's seat, did not object. He watched. He watched with the expression of a man reviewing a calculation he had already done once and was now doing again, arriving at the same answer, deciding whether he could afford to believe it. Harry didn't look at him directly. He didn't need to. The conversation had already happened in the hexagonal room, and everything that needed saying had been said, and now it was just time doing what time did. The session ended at 2 in the afternoon. Harry walked out into the ministry atrium, which was all gold and rushing movement and self-importance, and Sirius was there immediately. He'd been in the public gallery and had come down fast, and his expression was doing the same thing it had done in Grimmauld Place the first time they'd met, that unguarded joy that looked like it was still surprised by itself. "That last bit," Sirius said, "where you cited the 1742 precedent, Ragnarok," Harry said. "That one was entirely Ragnarok. Tell him I love him. He'll say something dry and complimentary about your inheritance management," Harry said. Sirius laughed, which was still a sound Harry filed every time he heard it, storing it against the years he hadn't had it. They walked toward the flue together, past the golden fountain that Harry intended to have replaced with something less self-congratulatory at the first available opportunity, and Hermione appeared from the other side of the atrium. She'd been in the public gallery too, moving with the rapid focused walk of someone who had several thoughts they needed to share at speed. "The seventh member," she said, falling into step. "The one who voted for the motion. Thickness. He's never voted against the blood status block in 30 years. "I know," Harry said. "How did you?" "His daughter is Muggle-born," Harry said. "She was in that 43%. He glanced at Hermione. "He's been voting for people who hurt her because he was afraid of what happened if he didn't. Today he voted for her. He'll be frightened about it for a week and then he'll be fine." He paused. Sometimes it just takes someone saying the true thing out loud, in an official room, with everyone watching. Sometimes the person who needed to hear it has been waiting for years. Hermione was quiet for a moment. "That's what you were really doing," she said. "Not just the legal argument." "The legal argument was the vehicle," Harry said. "The point was the room hearing that the argument exists. That it's sound, that it's made, that it's on the record." He looked at her. "You can't unknow a true thing once you've heard it stated plainly. People can ignore it. They can argue against it. But they can't unknow it." They reached the flue. Harry took a handful of powder from the pot beside the fireplace and thought about this day, the chamber, the seat, the warm stone, the 7 votes, and thought about all the days before it, the dream, the bus, the entrance to Gringotts, Ragnarok's office 3 floors underground, the cord. 3.5 years of the most concentrated living he could imagine, of being small and taking up only the space given to him, of choosing deliberately and patiently and precisely, of learning to be exactly what he was. He stepped into the flue. He said, "Hogwarts," because that was where he was from, and let the green fire take him home. 3 weeks after the Wisengamot session, Ragnarok sent a letter. It arrived by Gringotts courier, plain parchment, the old goblin's characteristic brevity. It said, "The Basilisk legal case has been accepted for review by the Pre-Charter Magical Tribunal. Estimated 6 months to resolution. The creature will likely be offered supervised mobility rights pending final judgment. I thought you would want to know promptly." Art below that, in smaller writing, clearly added as an afterthought, "The work is going well. Your mother would have been pleased. Your father would have been insufferable about it. Both of these things are compliments." Harry read it in the room of requirement on a Tuesday afternoon, with Hermione reading beside him and Neville's growing table filling the room with the smell of green things, and the castle warm around all of them in the way it always was now, the specific warmth of a building that knew who was in it and was glad of it. He set the letter down and picked up the book he'd been working through, Merlin's 3rd journal, which he'd been reading slowly because reading it fast would have been wasteful, and turned to where he'd left off, and read. Outside the window, Scotland was doing something complicated with spring, uncertain sunlight and wind and green coming back into the hills and patches, the way good things come back, not all at once but persistently, taking ground and holding it. Inside the room, 3 11-year-olds sat in the warmth of a castle that was old enough to have opinions and had decided, quietly and firmly, that it was on their side, and the work continued, and the world kept changing, and it was only the beginning.